Snow fell silently over the black jade roofs of the heavenly court. Not the soft snow of mortal winters, but pale spiritual frost drifting from the skies above the ninth heaven, where the stars themselves seemed distant and cold. Ancient bells echoed somewhere beyond the clouds, their heavy chimes rolling through endless white mist like mourning songs that had long forgotten who they were grieving for. At the center of the mountain path stood a young man dressed in flowing white robes stained faintly at the sleeves with fresh blood. No one dared approach him. The disciples, kneeling beside the shattered gate, lowered their heads the moment his footsteps passed. Even the elders standing beneath the spirit lanterns avoided meeting his eyes for too long. Fear lingered in the silence around him, quiet and instinctive, like animals sensing a storm before it arrived. The cultivation world called him many things: Heaven's Blade, the silent executioner, the white calamity. But within the heavenly court, he had no name worth remembering, only purpose. At 16, he had already reached the peak of core formation through the forbidden heart-severing art, a technique that burned away emotion in exchange for terrifying clarity. Fear, hesitation, grief, each feeling abandoned became another step toward ascension, another chain binding him closer to heaven, another piece of himself erased. The rogue cultivator before him trembled violently against the frozen stone courtyard, spiritual veins shattered, golden blood spreading slowly through the snow. "You slaughtered an entire clan," the man rasped. "Even children." The young executioner looked down at him quietly. His face remained calm, beautiful, almost inhuman beneath the falling frost. "The heavenly court judged them corrupted." "That isn't judgment," the rogue laughed weakly, blood spilling from his lips. "That's fear." For the first time, the mountain wind seemed louder. The executioner raised his sword. Moonlight slid across the silver blade like water. One movement. Clean. Merciless. The head rolled across the courtyard stones as the bells above the clouds rang once more. No anger. No satisfaction. No guilt. Only silence. Yet as he turned away, the faint scent of blood lingering beneath the snow, something unfamiliar stirred briefly within the empty chambers of his heart. Not remorse. Not doubt, only a strange exhaustion he could not name. Far below the heavenly court, beyond the immortal mountains and seas of clouds, countless lanterns flickered through the mortal world like distant stars waiting beneath the night. He did not look toward them, but somewhere deep within the parts of himself the heart-severing art had failed to erase completely, something wordless lingered there. A quiet loneliness vast enough to rival the heavens themselves. The rain began before dawn. Thin silver threads drifted quietly through the mountain valleys beneath the heavenly court, cloaking the stone paths in pale mist and blurring the distant sea of clouds below. Spirit lanterns swayed gently beneath temple eaves, their dim golden light reflecting across what black stone like scattered memories that refused to fade. The young executioner descended the mountain alone. White robes moved silently through the rain, untouched by mud or water, as though even the world itself feared staining him. The disciples guarding the outer gates lowered their heads the instant they saw him pass. None dared speak. The white calamity had returned from another execution. Yet before he could leave the lower courtyards, the scent of medicine drifted softly through the cold air. Warm, herbal, human. It came from a small pavilion hidden beside the cliffside gardens, where rainwater gathered beneath hanging wind chimes carved from jade. A young woman sat beneath the wooden awning, sleeves rolled loosely to her elbows as she sorted crushed spirit herbs into ceramic bowls. She looked entirely out of place within the heavenly court, too alive. While the immortal halls above felt carved from frost-tense silence, she carried warmth with her naturally, like spring hidden beneath winter snow. The executioner paused only briefly before continuing past. "You're bleeding." Her voice stopped him. Not fearful, not cautious, simply matter of fact. For a moment, the rain became the only sound between them. The young man lowered his gaze slightly. A thin line of blood had slipped unnoticed beneath the bandages wrapped around his wrist, staining white fabric crimson. "It is nothing," he answered quietly. Most people avoided looking at him for longer than a breath. She walked directly toward him instead. The wind stirred softly through the garden as she reached for his injured hand without hesitation. Her fingers were warm despite the cold rain, gentle as she unwound the soaked bandages. The executioner froze. Not because of pain, because he could not remember the last time another person had touched him without fear. "You should take better care of yourself," she murmured while applying crushed spirit medicine across the wound. "Even immortals can break eventually." He stared at her silently. There was no trembling in her hands, no tension in her breathing. Even knowing exactly who he was, she looked at him the same way one might look at an exhausted traveler caught in the rain. Human. The realization unsettled him more than hatred ever could. Above them, distant thunder rolled beyond the clouds. For the first time in years, the emptiness inside his chest shifted faintly, like ice cracking beneath still water. Small, almost imperceptible, yet impossible to ignore. Lantern City bloomed beneath the mortal sky, like a river of stars. Thousands of paper lanterns floated between tiled rooftops and arched bridges, their golden light trembling across canals dark with evening rain. Vendors called from beneath red awnings. Children ran laughing through misty streets, with sugar hawthorn skewers in their hands. Somewhere, a blind musician played an old folk song beside the water, the notes soft enough to be mistaken for memory. The young executioner stood at the edge of the city gate in white robes, silent beneath the glow. No one here knew him as the White Calamity. To the mortals passing by, he was only a handsome cultivator with snow-pale sleeves and eyes to calm for someone so young. They did not kneel. They did not lower their voices. They brushed past him with umbrellas and baskets, carrying warm bread, medicine, flowers, small ordinary burdens that had nothing to do with heaven. For some reason, that unsettled him. The girl beside him bought two steamed buns from an old woman and placed one into his hand before he could refuse. "You should eat while it's hot," she said. He looked down at the bun as if it were some unfamiliar spiritual artifact. "I do not require food." "I know." Her eyes curved faintly. "That doesn't mean you can't taste it." The steam rose between his fingers, soft and fragrant. After a long silence, he took a bite. It was simple. Warm dough. Sweet filling. Nothing rare. Nothing refined by immortal fire or infused with thousand-year spirit herbs. Yet the warmth spread across his tongue and lingered there. The girl watched him with quiet satisfaction, as though this small victory mattered more than any heavenly decree. Their mission had brought them here under shadow. In the past month, 3 districts had suffered hollow spirit outbreaks. No sect claimed responsibility. No demonic altar had been found. Only traces of grief-heavy chair remained in abandoned houses, wells, and narrow alleys where lantern light could not reach. By day, Lantern City laughed. By night, something wept beneath it. They followed those traces through the market, past silk shops and fortune stalls, past families gathering for the mid-autumn lantern rites. Everywhere the young executioner loped, mortals wasted their short lives on fragile Joe's painted masks. Sweet wine, love knots tied beneath moon trees. He had once considered such things meaningless. Now, walking beside the girl who had bandaged his wrist in the rain, he found himself watching too long. A father lifted his daughter onto his shoulders so she could hang a lantern higher than the others. 2 elderly women argued over the price of plum cakes, then laughed until their eyes watered. A young couple stood beneath one umbrella, pretending not to notice that their shoulders were touching. The executioner's step slowed. The girl noticed, but did not speak. That was her kindness. She never forced meaning into his silence. She only walked beside it, until something inside him began to listen. Near midnight, the first scream split the festival. The lanterns along the eastern canal guttered all at once. Golden light twisted into sickly blue. Mist poured from the water like breath from a sleeping corpse, and from within it emerged a hollow spirit shaped vaguely like a woman, its body woven from sorrow, resentment, and broken moonlight. The crowd scattered. The executioner moved before thought could form. His sword left its sheath with a sound like winter opening its eyes. One stroke severed the corrupted chest spreading through the street. Another pinned the spirit's shadow against the canal wall. The air froze under his killing intent, and for a heartbeat, Lantern City remembered what fear was. Then the spirit cried. Not in rage, in grief. The sound trembled through the street, carrying fragments of a life that had once been human. A mother waiting beside a sickbed, unpaid debts, a child's fever, prayers unanswered beneath festival lanterns. The executioner's blade paused for half a breath. The girl stepped forward, sleeves fluttering, palms glowing with gentle silver light. Her ched did not crush the spirit. It touched it, listened to it. The hollow spirit shuddered, its distorted form unraveling into countless pale motes that drifted upward like extinguished lanterns returning to the sky. When it vanished, silence remained. The mortals slowly emerged from hiding. A child began crying. Someone whispered thanks. Someone else picked up a fallen lantern and tried to relight it with shaking hands. The young executioner stood amid the scattered festival lights, sword lowered. He had destroyed many things called evil, but this was the first time he wondered what had hurt them before they became monsters. Beside him, The girl knelt to help a child retrieve a torn paper rabbit lantern from the wet stones. Her hands were still trembling from the strain, but she smiled anyway. The child smiled back. Something inside his chest stirred again, small as candlelight, painful as thawing ice. Above Lantern City, the moon emerged from behind the clouds, silver and distant. Beneath it, thousands of lanterns rose slowly into the night, carrying wishes from people who would one day die, people who loved anyway, laughed anyway, hoped anyway. For the first time, the young executioner did not look away. By dawn, Lantern City had stopped singing. The festival lanterns that had risen so beautifully beneath the moon now drifted as ash across the eastern canal. Wet paper clung to the stone bridges. Broken masks floated in rainwater. The warmth of the night before had not vanished completely, but it had become fragile, like a candle cupped between trembling hands. The heavenly court's decree arrived with the morning mist. No morning rites, no investigation beyond the official report. All witnesses touched by Holocha were to be silenced before corruption could spread. The young executioner stood beneath a half-burned lantern tree, the jade command tablet cold against his palm. Around him, the surviving mortals knelt in terror. The old woman who had sold steamed buns, the child with the torn rabbit lantern, a father still holding his daughter against his chest. Ordinary people who had laughed beneath the same moon only hours ago. His sword rested quietly at his side. It had never felt heavy before. The girl stepped into the rain between him and the kneeling crowd. Her sleeves were damp, her face pale from using too much spiritual energy the night before, but her eyes did not waver. "They are not corrupted," she said softly. "The decree has been issued." "Then the decree is wrong." Those words should have meant nothing. The heavenly court was law. The heart-severing art existed to remove hesitation before judgment. His blade had fallen countless times without trembling, but now, beneath the smell of rain and burnt lantern paper, he remembered the old woman placing a warm bun into his hand. He remembered the child smiling when her rabbit lantern was returned. He remembered thousands of mortal wishes rising into the sky, brief and foolish and beautiful. His fingers tightened around the hilt. The command tablet pulsed once, urging obedience. "Kill." The sword rose. The mortals closed their eyes. The girl did not move. For one breath, the world became impossibly still. Then his blade stopped, only an inch from falling. A thin crack echoed inside him, not in the sword, not in the jade tablet, but somewhere deep beneath the frozen layers of his soul. The heart-severing art recoiled like a struck bell. Spiritual frost spread beneath his skin, sharp and merciless, punishing the emotion he had failed to erase. Pain flashed through his meridians. His expression did not change, but the girl saw it. She saw the almost invisible tremor in his hand. The silence that was no longer empty, but breaking. The executioner lowered his sword. "The witnesses were cleansed," he said at last, voice calm enough to sound like winter. "There is no corruption here." The jade command tablet shattered in his palm. Far above the clouds, heaven heard the first disobedience of its perfect blade, and beneath the ruined lantern tree, amid rain, ash, and frightened human breathing, the white calamity hesitated, and became a little less divine. After Lantern City, the heavenly court did not summon him home. No punishment came openly. No elder descended with thunder in his sleeves. No divine chain fell from the clouds. Instead, a new order arrived in silence. Investigate hollow spirit traces across the mortal provinces. Do not return until the source is found. Exile disguised as duty. The young executioner accepted it without expression, but when he stepped beyond the city gate, the girl was already waiting beneath a willow tree with a travel pack, a medicine case, and two paper umbrellas tied together with red string. "You walk too fast alone," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "This mission is dangerous." She smiled lightly. "Then it's good you're not going alone." The road south began beneath fading lantern smoke and ended somewhere beyond mountains no map fully trusted. They crossed rice fields silvered by morning mist, villages built around ancient spirit wells, and forests where foxfire glimmered between blue bamboo stalks. At night, the stars felt closer than the heavenly court ever had. For the first few days, he walked half a step ahead, always alert, always distant. She filled the silence anyway. She asked farmers about missing cattle, bought medicine from roadside grannies, helped children untangle kite strings from temple roofs. She treated wounded hunters, argued with dishonest merchants, and bowed to forgotten roadside shrines even when no god answered. He watched all of it with the quiet intensity of someone studying a language he had never been taught. Once, In a mountain village warmed by sunset, an old couple invited them to share dinner after she healed their grandson's fever. The table was rough wood, the soup was thin, the pickled vegetables were too salty. The young executioner sat stiffly beside her, unused to being thanked instead of feared. The grandmother placed extra rice in his bowl. "You're too thin for a cultivator," she scolded gently. The girl lowered her head to hide a laugh. He stared at the rice. Then, slowly, he ate. That night, while fireflies drifted above the fields, she found him standing alone beneath the eaves. "You don't dislike people," she said. He did not answer. "You just never had a reason to look at them closely." The wind moved through the rice stalks like the breathing of the earth. Far away, children laughed inside the house, safe for one more night because of them. His fingers curled faintly at his side. "I was taught closeness creates weakness. And yet," she said softly, "you saved them." He turned toward her. Moonlight rested across her face, gentle and fearless, just as it had in the rain beside the heavenly court pavilion. For the first time, he noticed how tired she looked after healing others, and how she still smiled before anyone could worry about her. Something inside him shifted again. Not violently this time. Quietly. Like snow beginning to melt under sunlight. Their journey continued. In the western marshes, he cut down corrupted beasts before they reached a fishing town, while she purified the water with silver ched that spread like moonlight beneath the reeds. In the red maple valleys, they followed grief-heavy traces to an abandoned shrine where the last prayer of a dead sect disciple had become a lingering curse. In a desert market beneath twin moons, she bought him a wooden charm carved with a white crane. "For safe travel," she said. "I do not need protection." "I know." She tied it to his sword anyway. He did not remove it. Days became weeks. The distance between their footsteps shortened without either of them naming it. He began slowing when the road turned steep. She began leaving half of her tea untouched because she knew he would eventually drink it after pretending not to want any. When storms came, he raised a spiritual barrier before the rain touched her shoulders. When his meridians ached from the cracked heart-severing art, she sat nearby without asking questions, warming medicine between her palms until he accepted it. Trust did not arrive like thunder. It gathered like dawn. Soft, gradual, inevitable. One evening, they reached a cliffside path overlooking the mortal world below. Villages glowed in the valley like fallen constellations, each light small, temporary, stubbornly alive. Above them, the heavens remained vast and cold. The girl stood beside him, her sleeve almost brushing his. "Do you still think all of this is meaningless?" she asked. He looked down at the distant lanterns. He remembered the bun warming his hand, the child's rabbit lantern, the villagers' laughter, the old grandmother placing rice in his bowl as if he were someone worth feeding. After a long silence, he answered, "I do not know." It was not acceptance. Not yet. But for a man shaped to be heaven's perfect blade, uncertainty was already rebellion. Beside him, she smiled without looking at him. And in that quiet moment between earth and sky, beneath stars untouched by divine decree, the white calamity continued walking through the mortal world, no longer entirely alone. Rain found them in the blue bamboo forest before sunset. It arrived softly at first, tapping against leaves like distant fingers on a guqin string, then deepened until the whole mountain path shimmered beneath silver mist. The world narrowed to wet stone steps, swaying bamboo, and the quiet sound of two sets of footsteps moving through rain. The girl opened one of the paper umbrellas tied to her pack. The young executioner raised his hand, intending to form a spiritual barrier as he always did, but she stepped closer before the spell could bloom. "Use this instead," she said. He looked at the umbrella, then at the rain. "It is inefficient. It is also normal." That word silenced him. Normal. He had crossed battlefields beneath falling ash and heavenly frost. He had walked through storms without letting a single drop touch his robes. Yet now, beneath a fragile paper umbrella painted with faded lotus flowers, he found himself slowing his steps to match hers. The umbrella was too small for two people. Their shoulders brushed, only once, barely. Yet the contact lingered longer than it should have. The girl pretended not to notice. He pretended not to feel it. Between them, the rain continued falling with patient gentleness, filling the silence neither knew how to name. They stopped at an abandoned roadside shrine and evening settled over the forest. Moss covered the stone fox statues. Wild flowers grew through cracked tiles. The girl lit a small lamp with silver ched, its glow warm against the rain-darkened world. She wrung water from her sleeves and laughed softly. "You really don't know how to share an umbrella. I adjusted my pace. You walked like you were escorting a prisoner. He paused. The correction should not have mattered. But after a moment, he said, then I will do better next time. Her laughter faded into something quieter. Outside, rain streamed from the shrine roof in crystal lines. Inside, the small lamp flickered between them. She warmed medicine over the flame for his unstable meridians, and he watched her hands move with familiar care, remembering the pavilion, the bandage, the first touch that had not feared him. When she handed him the cup, their fingers brushed again. This time, neither moved away immediately. The heart-severing art stirred faintly in his chest, cold and warning. But the warmth of her hand remained. For the first time, he did not know which feeling he wanted to keep. By morning, the rain had softened to mist. They continued down the mountain beneath the same umbrella, closer than before, walking toward villages glowing faintly beyond the trees. Neither spoke of the night, but something between them had changed. Not love yet, not confession, only comfort taking root in silence, small, stubborn, and alive beneath the rain. The forgotten valley appeared after 7 days of rain. Mist lay thick between the mountains, pale and unmoving, as though the valley had been holding its breath for centuries. Withered prayer ribbons hung from dead pine branches, their faded red cloth fluttering without wind. Beneath their feet, the earth was soft with fallen leaves, and every step released the faint scent of old incense and damp ash. No birds called there. No insects sang. Even the girls' silver ched in when they crossed the broken stone gate. The young executioner touched the white crane charm tied to his sword. He had never removed it. He told himself it was because unnecessary movement wasted time, yet whenever the wooden charm clicked softly against his scabbard, the sound reminded him of her hands tying it there beneath the desert moons. Now, in this silent valley, that small sound felt strangely alive. They found the first shrine near a dried riverbed. Hundreds of named tablets were scattered across the ground, half buried in mud. Some belonged to cultivators. Most belonged to mortals, families, children, travelers who had once lived, prayed, waited, and vanished. The girl knelt before them, brushing dirt from the nearest tablet with careful fingers. These people were not killed in battle, she'd whisper. The executioner looked toward the valley's center, where black mist coiled around the ruins of an abandoned village. They were left behind. The words came from him before he understood why. A cold ripple passed through the air. From within the broken houses, shapes began to rise. Hollow spirits. Not one. Dozens. Their bodies were woven from grief-heavy ched, faces blurred like ink washed by rain. Some reached outward with hands that trembled. Some clutched empty bundles against their chests. Some walked in circles, repeating paths they had forgotten they were too dead to finish. The executioner drew his sword. Winter flooded the valley. The spirits turned toward him, and for an instant, their sorrow became hunger. He moved with the terrifying grace the cultivation world feared. Silver-white sword light split the mist. Corrupted chest scattered beneath each strike. Yet, every time one hollow spirit dissolved, another cry rose from the ruins behind it. Not rage, not evil, only despair given shape. The girl stepped past him, her face pale but resolute. Silver ched bloomed from her palms, soft as moonlight on water. Don't cut them yet. They are corrupted. They are grieving. His blade stopped above a spirit crawling through the mud toward a collapsed doorway. The spirit's mouth opened soundlessly. A memory spilled into the air. A village sealed during a plague. Messengers ignored. Prayers sent to nearby sects and answered. Terrans singing to hungry children. Cultivators passing overhead on flying swords, too busy chasing immortality to look down. The executioner's fingers tightened around his sword. The heart-severing art pulsed coldly within him, urging clarity. Grief is weakness. Attachment breeds suffering. Cut it away. But the valley was filled with people who had not been weak because they loved. They had suffered because no one answered that love. The girl's chest spread through the ruins, touching each hollow spirit without force. Her breathing trembled. The effort drained color from her lips, yet she did not retreat. One by one, the spirits paused, as if remembering the warmth of names once spoken by living voices. The executioner lowered his blade. For the first time, he did not destroy it. He guarded. When a corrupted spirit lunged toward her from the mist, he stepped between them, sword flashing only enough to sever the darkness wrapped around its soul. Not the soul itself. The girl glanced back at him. No surprise. Only trust. That trust struck deeper than any wound. All night, they remained in the valley. She purified what sorrow she could. He stood beside her through the rainless dark, cutting away corruption, shielding her from backlash, listening to the fragments of Lev's heaven would have labeled meaningless. By dawn, pale light touched the ruined village. The hollow spirits had vanished. In their place, countless motes of silver rose into the sky, like lanterns delayed for any festival, carrying prayers no sect had answer. The girl swayed. Before she could fall, his hand caught her wrist, warm skin beneath cold fingers. For a breath, neither moved. Then she looked at him, exhausted but gentle. Emotions didn't make them monsters. The executioner looked across the valley of empty homes, his white robe stained with mud, his sword still lower. No, he said quietly. The answer surprised them both. Above the forgotten valley, morning mist lifted at last, revealing mountains washed clean by light. And inside the man called the White Calamity, another piece of heaven's silence began to break. After the forgotten valley, they did not speak much. Some silences were empty. This one was not. It carried the names of the dead, the fading silver motes that had risen into dawn, and the quiet truth neither of them could return from. Sorrow was not always corruption, and mercy was not always weakness. They reached a small riverside town 3 days later. Spring had arrived there early. Peach blossoms leaned over the water, scattering soft pink petals across the current. Children ran along the riverbank chasing paper windmills, their laughter bright enough to make the world feel impossible after the valley's grief. The girl stopped beside a food stall and bought 2 bowls of sweet rice dumplings. He looked at the bowl she pushed into his hands. I do not require. I know, she interrupted, eyes gentle. Taste it anyway. The words were familiar now. So was the warmth. They sat beneath a peach tree, all sunlight filtered through blossoms. A group of children nearby struggled to lift a torn kite shaped like a white crane. The executioner watched silently as the kite tangled itself around a branch above them. The youngest child stared up helplessly, lips trembling. Before the girl could rise, a thread of pale chest slipped from the executioner's fingers. The branch bent. The kite floated down unharmed, landing gently in the child's arms. The children froze. Then one of them bowed clumsily. Thank you, Big Brother. The title struck him with strange force. Not Lord. Not Immortal. Not Calamity. Big Brother. The girl lowered her gaze to hide the sudden brightness in her eyes. The children ran back toward the river, the white crane kite rising unsteadily into the wind. It dipped, spun, nearly collapsed, then finally caught the breeze and climbed into the blue sky. The executioner watched it. His hand brushed unconsciously against the wooden crane charm tied to his sword. And then, without warning, his lips curved faintly. It was small, so small the world almost missed it. But the girl did not. She saw the cold mask soften for a single breath, saw sunlight touch his face where frost had always lived, saw not heaven's blade, not the White Calamity, but a young man quietly surprised by an ordinary child's gratitude. Her chest tightened. For reasons she could not name, she nearly cried. He noticed her staring. What is it? She turned away quickly, pretending to watch the river. Nothing, she said, voice softer than the falling petals. But it was not nothing. It was the first proof that something buried beneath the heart-severing art had survived. And beneath the peach blossoms, while the white crane kite danced above the river, she understood with aching tenderness. He was not becoming weaker. He was becoming human. The first fracture came beneath a moon without clouds. They had stopped at an abandoned watchtower above the river plains, where old banners snapped in the night wind and the distant villages glowed like scattered embers below. After days of travel, the world should have felt peaceful. The girl had fallen asleep beside the small lamp, her medicine case open near her hand, peach petals still caught in the folds of her sleeve. The young executioner sat facing the moon, circulating chi through his meridians. At first, everything was silent. Then warmth appeared where there should have been emptiness. A child's voice calling him Big Brother. The girl's hidden smile beneath peach blossoms. The brush of her fingers around a medicine cup. The shared umbrella. The white crane charm tapping gently against his sword. Memory after memory rose inside him, soft and dangerous. The heart-severing art reacted instantly. Frost spread across his inner sea. His spiritual core tightened like a blade being forced back into its sheath. Pain lanced through his chest, so cold it felt almost clean. The technique tried to cut away the warmth before it could root deeper. His breathing remained steady. His hand, however, trembled. Across the tower, the girl woke. She did not call his name. She had learned his silences too well for that. Instead, she rose quietly and knelt before him, her silver chain folding like moonlight over water. You're hurting, she whispered. It will pass. You always say that when it doesn't. The words entered him more sharply than the pain. He opened his eyes. For a moment, her face was close enough for him to see the whirring she tried to soften. The lamp between them flickered. Outside, the wind carried the scent of river reeds and distant smoke. Everything about the night was fragile. Everything about her presence was warm. The heart-severing art surged again. This time, the frost cracked outward. His chest burst uncontrolled through the tower floor, slicing stone into pale lines. The lamp went out. The old banners above them froze solid, then shattered into drifting crystal threads. The girl reached for his wrist. He pulled away before she could touch him. The movement was small, but it hurt her more than the shattered stone. Silence fell between them. He saw it immediately, the brief stillness in her hand, the way her expression folded inward before she hit it. He had protected her from monsters, from rain, from stray blades in forgotten valleys. Now he had protected himself from her. That realization twisted somewhere beneath his ribs. "I am dangerous when my cultivation destabilizes," he said. Her voice was gentle, but not weak. "You are not dangerous because you feel." He looked away. The moonlight made his face pale as frost again, almost like the woe from the heavenly court had returned. But the mask no longer fit perfectly. There were cracks now. Too many. "The technique rejects attachment," he said. "If I continue like this, my core may collapse." She was quiet for a long time. Then she set the medicine cup beside him, not forcing him to take it. "Then don't face it alone." Such simple words. Such impossible mercy. The night deepened. He did not answer. She did not leave. Eventually, she sat at the far edge of the broken tower, giving him distance or refusing to abandon him. That kindness was worse than accusation. It settled into the ruins between them, patient and aching. Near dawn, the frost across his meridians receded, leaving behind thin cracks only he could feel. When he stood, the white crane charm on his sword had split slightly down the middle. He stared at it for a long time. The girl noticed too, but said nothing. Below the tower, morning light slowly touched the mortal villages. Smoke rose from kitchens. Rivers shimmered gold. Somewhere far away, life continued with unbearable tenderness. He tied the cracked charm more securely to his sword. Then he began walking before she could see his expression. From that day onward, he kept half a step more distance between them. Not because he cared less, because he cared too much. And behind them, unseen above the waking world, the first true fracture in heaven's perfect blade glimmered quietly beneath the sun. River Province burned beneath a red sunset, not with ordinary fire, but with corrupted spiritual flame that crawled across the water like living oil. The great river that had once fed 7 cities now reflected a sky stained the color of rusted gold. Fishing boats lay overturned along the banks. Prayer flags snapped wildly from broken bridges. In the distance, warning bells rang from village towers, each note swallowed by the roar of fleeing crowds. The young executioner arrived with frost already gathering around his sleeves. Beside him, the girl looked across the chaos, her face pale beneath the ash-darkened sky. Her medicine case hung at her side. The cracked white crane charm tapped against his sword, fragile and persistent. For days he had kept half a step between them. Here, amid screaming civilians and burning river mist, that distance suddenly felt unbearable. A wave of hollow spirits surged from the eastern bank, their bodies twisted from panic, grief, and resentment. They rose out of the smoke like drowned memories, reaching for the living with hands made of black water and broken light. The executioner drew his sword. Winter descended. One strike froze the river's surface. Another shattered the corrupted flames crawling toward the village. His white robes flashed through the battlefield like moonlight through storm clouds, beautiful and terrifying, every movement precise enough to cut despair from the air itself. But there were too many. The hollow spirits were not born from one sorrow this time. They were fed by hundreds. Refugees trapped between sex soldiers. Families separated by burning bridges. Children crying for parents lost in the smoke. The girl ran toward them without hesitation. Silver cherry blossomed from her palms, spreading over the wounded like soft moonlight. She guided terrified villagers through collapsing streets, sealed corrupted wounds with trembling fingers, and used her own spiritual energy to form barriers over children too frightened to move. "Go to the western bridge," she called. "Do not look back." The executioner heard her voice through the chaos. It steadied him. Then the sky split. A greater hollow spirit rose from the river's center, vast and faceless, its body formed from countless overlapping cries. The frozen river cracked beneath it. Black waves surged toward the evacuation path, carrying corrupted Che density enough to erase mortal souls on contact. The executioner turned. Too far. The girl saw it before he did. The western bridge was still crowded with civilians. Old people, children. The grandmother carrying a baby wrapped in blue cloth. A boy clutching a torn paper windmill. People who would never know the names of those who saved them. The girl stepped between them and the black wave. Her silver Che erupted. For one breath, she looked impossibly small beneath the collapsing sky. Then moonlight became a wall. The impact struck her barrier with a sound like a mountain breaking. Her feet slid back across the stone. Blood darkened the corner of her lips. Still, she held on. The executioner's heart stopped. Not metaphorically. For one impossible instant, all circulation of Che within him ceased. The heart-severing art screamed inside his soul, commanding stillness, clarity, obedience. But clarity shattered. Fear entered him like a blade, raw, violent, human. He crossed the battlefield in a single step, but the wave struck again before he reached her. The silver barrier cracked. The girl's body trembled. Her medicine case fell open, scattering herbs across the blood-wet stones. She looked back only once, not at the civilians. At him. There was no regret in her eyes, only apology. That broke him. The next moment, the barrier exploded. Silver light scattered across River Province like broken stars. The girl was thrown backward through the air, her sleeves torn by corrupted Che, her body limp against the burning sky. The executioner caught her before she touched the ground. For the first time in his life, his hands shook opally. Her breathing was faint, too faint. Silver Che leaked from her meridians in thin, fading threads. The warmth he had come to recognize, the warmth from the pavilion, the umbrella, the medicine cups, the peach blossoms, was slipping away beneath his fingers. No. The word left him before he understood it. Small, hoarse, terrified. Around him, the battlefield continued to burn, but he no longer heard it clearly. The world had narrowed to her face, her closed eyes, the fragile rise and fall of her breath. He had seen death countless times. He had delivered it with an unchanging expression. But this was different. This was not death as judgment. This was loss. And suddenly, the man called the White Calamity understood why mortals up beneath funeral lanterns, why parents screamed for children, why hollow spirits were born from grief too heavy to disappear. Because attachment was not weakness. It was the place where the soul could be wounded. The heart-severing art shattered. Not completely. Not yet. The deep enough that cold spiritual chain snapped across his inner sea. Frost tore through his meridians. Blood rose in his throat. The technique tried to punish the emotion, tried to cut away the fear, tried to return him to divine emptiness. He refused. Slowly, he laid the girl beneath the shelter of a broken stone arch. His outer robe settled over her like fresh snow. Then he stood. The river wind fell silent. All across River Province, surviving cultivators turned toward him. The white crane charm tied to his sword split fully down the center, yet did not fall. His Che changed. Before, it had been cold, perfect, silent, emotionless. Now it was winter filled with grief. The hollow spirits recoiled. The executioner raised his sword. And for the first time, his killing intent was not obedience to heaven. It was protection. He moved through the battlefield like a storm that had learned sorrow. Sword-like carved across the river in vast arcs, freezing corrupted waves mid-surge. Each strike severed the darkness without touching the souls trapped within. He no longer fought like an executioner erasing impurity. He fought like someone defending the fragile warmth of the world. The greater hollow spirit roar, drawing every grief in the province into itself. He stepped forward. In his mind, he saw her smile beneath the rain, her hand reaching for his wound, her voice saying, "Then don't face it alone." He drove his sword into the frozen river. White light erupted, not divine, not heavenly, human. The river split beneath him, and the corrupted spirit dissolved into countless pale motes that rose into the crimson sky, like lanterns released too late. When silence finally returned, River Province was no longer burning. Only steam drifted above the water. The villagers lived. The bridge still stood. The executioner turned back. His steps were unsteady for the first time. He knelt beside the girl and took her hand carefully, as if afraid even his touch might break her. Her skin was cold. Too cold. He pressed his spiritual energy into her meridians, ignoring the agony tearing through his own. "Stay," he whispered. The word carried no command, only pleading. At dawn, rain began to fall over River Province. Soft rain, merciful rain. The girl's fingers moved faintly against his palm. The executioner lowered his head, and for a long time, he did not move. No one dared approach him. But this time, the silence around him was not fear. It was the silence of the world witnessing a divine weapon become human through the terror of almost losing the one person who had taught him how to feel. Far above the mortal clouds, heaven felt a fracture widen. And beside the river washed clean by rain, the white calamity held her hand as though it was the only thing keeping him alive. After River Province, his sword no longer felt the same in his hand. It was still light, still sharp, still obedient to the smallest movement of his wrist. Yet, every time he drew it, he remembered the girl lying beneath the broken stone arch, her fingers cold in his palm, her breath faint beneath the rain. A blade could end a life in one motion, but he had learned that protecting one was far more difficult. They remained in River Province until the wounded could travel. The girl slept for 3 days in a riverside shrine wrapped in his outer robe, silver jet flickering weakly around her like a candle refusing to die. He sat outside beneath the eaves, unmoving, while villagers passed quietly with bowls of medicine, blankets, and whispered thanks. No one called him White Calamity there. To them, he was the cultivator who had stood between the river and their children. When the girl finally woke, Dom was touching the water. He was repairing the broken white crane charm with a thin thread of spiritual frost, clumsy and careful in a way no one would have believed of him. Her voice was faint. "You kept it." His hand paused. "It was tied to my sword." "That isn't an answer." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, "I did not want it to fall." Her eyes softened. Outside, the river flowed clean beneath morning light. Days later, a new hollow trace appeared near the western villages. Before, he would have waited for orders, judged corruption, and erased the source. This time, he rose before any command could arrive. The girl watched from the shrine doorway, still pale but standing. "You're going." He looked toward the distant smoke rising beyond the fields. "There are people there." A simple answer, but it changed everything. When he reached the village, he did not descend like judgment. He placed himself before the fleeing mortals, sword lower, until the last child crossed behind him. His chest spread not as killing frost, but as a wall of white light, cold enough to halt corruption, gentle enough not to wound those it sheltered. Only then did he strike. Each movement carried new meaning. He cut two open paths. He froze collapsing beams. He severed darkness from souls instead of bodies from life. The sword that had once existed to execute now moved to protect. And far away, watching from beneath the shrine's old roof, the girl pressed a hand to her heart. The fear of losing her still lived inside him. But now, beside that fear, something else had begun to grow. A will of his own. After River Province, the world began to whisper his name differently. The White Calamity had disobeyed heaven's pattern. He had protected mortals, if for receiving orders, purified hollow spirits instead of erasing them, and left behind witnesses who spoke not of a monster in white, but of a sword that stood before the flood. Such stories traveled faster than flying talismans. By the time the first autumn leaves reddened across the cultivation world, every major sect had heard of River Province. In golden halls and mountain pavilions, elders gathered behind closed doors. Some praised him, more feared him. A heavenly blade with a will of its own was no longer a weapon. It was a threat. At Cloud Mirror Summit, the sects assembled beneath a sky heavy with rain. Their banners lined the cliffs like rival storms. Azure Sword Sect in blue silk, Crimson Lotus Valley in red, Black Tortoise Hall in iron gray, and dozens more whose disciples stood stiffly beneath watchful elders. Spirit Crane circled above the mountain peak, their cries thin against the rising tension. The young executioner arrived without ceremony. The girl walked beside him, still recovering from River Province, her face calm though her steps were slower than before. He noticed every sign of weakness she tried to hide. The slight delay before she climbed each stair. The faint tremor when her hand brushed her medicine case. He did not offer help in front of the sects, but he slowed his pace until she never had to fall behind. That small kindness did not escape the watching eyes. Inside the summit hall, accusations bloomed like poison flowers. The hollow spirit outbreaks were spreading. Mortal provinces were collapsing. Some sects demanded stricter purging. Others wanted forbidden research into grief-heavy chat. A few suggested sealing entire cities before corruption could spread. Lives became numbers. Villages became acceptable losses. The girl's hands tightened within her sleeves. The executioner looked across the hall and thought of Lantern City's Rabbit Lantern, the Forgotten Valley's named tablets, the child at River Province clutching a windmill beneath the burning sky. Once, he would have accepted calculations spoken in cold voices. Now, each word sounded like a blade turned toward the helpless. An elder from Black Tortoise Hall finally rose. The heavenly court's executioner has grown sentimental. That is why corruption spreads. Silence deepened. The executioner lifted his eyes. Frost gathered faintly along the floor, but he did not draw his sword. Corruption spreads, he said quietly, because you abandon people, until grief has nowhere left to go. The hall fell utterly still. Beside him, the girl looked at him with something soft and aching in her gaze. Outside, thunder rolled beyond the summit clouds. That day, no alliance was formed, only suspicion. When they left Cloud Mirror Summit, sect disciples watched from the rain-darkened steps as if witnessing the beginning of a legend, and they were not sure they wanted to survive. The girl walked beside him beneath the same taper umbrella from the blue bamboo forest, its faded lotus flowers trembling in the wind. You said what they needed to hear, she murmured. No, he replied, looking toward the storm gathering over the mortal lands. I said what they refused to hear. Far below, signal fires lit one by one across the provinces. Not warnings of hollow spirits this time, warnings of war. And between heaven's cold decree and the mortal world's fragile lanterns, the two of them continued forward, closer than before, carrying the dangerous truth that compassion itself had become rebellion. The truth was buried beneath a temple no sect admitted existed. They found it after following hollow traces beyond Cloud Mirror Summit, past rain-black cliffs and abandoned watchtowers, into a mountain range or even spiritual beasts refused to enter. The sky there remained dim at noon, as if sunlight had been thinned by something ancient. Broken stone pillars rose from the earth like rids of a dead god, each carved with symbols older than the heavenly court. The girl stopped before the sealed gate. Her silver chet trembled. Not from fear. Recognition. The young executioner noticed at once. Since River Province, he had learned the smallest changes in her breathing. He knew when pain returned to her meridians. He knew when she hid exhaustion behind a smile. Now, standing before the temple, he saw something colder than weakness pass through her eyes. This place, she whispered. I've dreamed of it. The gate opened without touch. Inside, moon-white dust drifted through endless darkness. Murals covered the walls, mortals healing beneath blackened skies, cultivators tearing emotion from their souls, a great sea of hollow spirits rising toward heaven. At the center of every painting stood a woman with silver light pouring from her chest. The girl's footsteps slowed. The executioner walked beside her, not ahead. At the deepest chamber, they found the altar. It was carved from black jade, the same cold stone as the heavenly court's highest halls. Suspended above it was a broken crystal mirror, its surface reflecting not their faces, but memories. A war before recorded history, a world drowned in grief-heavy chet. Heaven descending not to save humanity, but to bind it. And a soul of pure silver light offered as a seal to contain the first hollow abyss. The girl staggered. The mirror brightened. Her reflection appeared within it not as she was now, but robed in ancient white, standing alone before an ocean of darkness. The truth entered her like winter. Her soul was not nearly sensitive to hollow spirits. It carried the remnant of the first seal. The same ancient force that had once contained the catastrophe now lived inside her, reborn into flesh, fragile and smiling, walking through mortal towns with a medicine case and tired hands. No, she breathed. The chamber shook. Black mist leaked from the altar, drawn toward her silver chet like hunger answering a name. For the first time, the hollow traces did not recoil from her. They bowed. The girl stepped back, horror breaking across her face. All this time, they followed me. The executioner reached for her. She flinched before she could stop herself. That small movement hurt both of them. He withdrew his hand slowly, not from rejection, but to give her space. Outside the temple, thunder rolled across the sealed mountains. Inside, silver light and black mist circled her like two halves of a forgotten moon. If I am the seal, she whispered, then if I break, the world breaks, he finished quietly. She looked at him then, eyes shining with fear she had always hidden from others. The girl who had never feared the white calamity now feared herself. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was only kind, only warm, only the person who had taught him how to hold an umbrella, how to taste sweetness, how to protect rather than execute. But the murals surrounded them. The world had logic. Even love could not erase truth. So he said the only thing he could. Then I will not let you break. Her lips trembled. For one breath, she looked as if she might believe him. Then the mirror cracked, and from within its shattered surface Countless hollow voices whispered her forgotten name. The girl lowered her gaze, clutching her medicine case, as though it were the last proof that she was still herself. When they left the buried temple, dawn had not come. The mountains remained gray and silent. She walked ahead for the first time, leaving a careful distance between them. He followed without closing it. Between them hung a truth heavier than any heavenly decree. The warmth that had saved him might one day become the wound that devoured the world. The summons came as snow, not falling from the sky, but rising from the earth in pale reverse, gathering around his feet, while the girl slept beneath a dying temple lamp. They had taken shelter in a ruined monastery after leaving the buried shrine, and all night she had kept her back turned, as if distance could protect him from the truth inside her soul. He had not crossed that distance, but he had not slept either. When the heavenly snow touched his sword, the cracked white crane charm turned cold. A path opened through the dark. At its end stood the heavenly court. Black jade palaces floated above a sea of clouds, unchanged from the place that had carved him into a weapon. Spirit bells rang in the distance, heavy and ancient. Elders waited beneath frost-white banners, their faces calm with the cruelty of those who believed themselves merciful. He stepped into the hall alone. At the highest seat, the heavenly sovereign looked down at him like one might look upon a blade returned to its sheath. "You have wandered long enough." The words echoed through the palace. Images unfolded in the air around him. Lantern City, the Forgotten Valley, River Province, the buried temple, the girl standing before the black jade altar with silver light trembling from her soul. "She is the remnant seal," the sovereign said. "And all seals eventually crack." The executioner said nothing. "She will draw hollow spirits. She will awaken grief buried beneath the world. One day, she will become the door through which the catastrophe returns." The hall darkened. Then another vision appeared. Himself, robed in celestial white, standing above the nigh heavens with a complete spiritual core. Eyes empty and perfect. No pain. No hesitation. No fear of losing anyone. The heart-severing art restore. Purify. Elevated beyond mortal limitation. Supreme ascension. The power to silence every hollow spirit forever. The price was simple. Abandon her. Sever the emotions she had awakened. Return to heaven as the flawless blade he had been meant to become. For a moment, the offer was terrifyingly beautiful. No more pain tearing through his meridians. No more fear when her breathing weakened. No more warmth threatening to become grief. No more trembling hands. No more dreams of rain, lanterns, peach blossoms, and a girl who looked at him as if he were human. Only peace. Cold, perfect peace. The heart-severing art stirred within him like an old master calling a lost disciple home. Then, from somewhere far below the clouds, he remembered her voice. "You should eat while it's hot. Then don't face it alone. You are not dangerous because you feel." The visions wavered. His fingers moved to the cracked crane charm. Small, wooden, imperfect, a thing with no divine value at all. Yet it had stayed with him through rain, grief, blood, and the first moments of his own heart returning. The sovereign's voice sharpened. "Choose wisely. A single woman is not worth the ruin of the world." The executioner lifted his eyes. For the first time in that hall, the elders saw something in him they had never trained, never permitted, never understood. Anger. Not wild. Not loud. Human. "If the world can only be saved by becoming empty," he said quietly, "then it was never saved." The heavenly bells stopped. Frost cracked beneath his feet. He turned away before judgment could fall. Behind him, the sovereign's final words followed like a curse. "Then when she destroys everything, remember that you chose her." He returned to the ruined monastery before dawn. The girl was awake, standing beneath the broken doorway as morning mist gathered around her. She looked at him as though she already knew some part of what had happened. He wanted to tell her everything. Instead, he only stepped closer and placed the cracked crane charm carefully into her palm. Her fingers closed around it. The distance between them remained. But something had changed. Heaven had offered him eternity, and for the first time, he had refused. That night, the ruined monastery was too quiet. The girl sat beneath the broken doorway until the moon climbed above the mountain ridge, holding the cracked white crane charm in both hands. Its wooden body had split down the center, but a thin thread of his spiritual frost still held it together. Imperfect, fragile, refusing to fall apart. Just like him, just like her. Inside the monastery, the young executioner rested beside the dying lamp, eyes closed, his breathing steady but shallow. The backlash from refusing heaven still lingered in his meridians. Frost occasionally surfaced along his wrist, then vanished beneath his sleeve. He had chosen her. That truth should have warmed her. Instead, it frightened her more than the buried temple ever had, because the heavenly sovereign was right about one thing. Her soul was a seal, and all seals eventually cracked. If she stayed, he would keep choosing her, again and again, until heaven broke him for it. So before dawn, while mist curled through the collapsed courtyard, she placed the crane charm beside his sword and walked away. She did not take the umbrella. She did not take the medicine cup he had begun using without being asked. She only carried her medicine case and the terrible tenderness of every memory they had shared. By the time he woke, the lamp had gone out. For a moment, he simply stared at the empty space where she should have been. Then his gaze fell to the crane charm beside his sword. The world became silent. Not the silence of the heart-severing art. The silence after something precious disappears. He stood outside. The mountain wind scattered dead leaves across the courtyard. Her footsteps had already faded, but traces of silver chest still lingered faintly in the mist. He followed them without hesitation. She had gone toward the abyssal river, where grief-heavy Che gathered beneath black cliffs and no sect dared build a shrine. By sunset, the sky had turned violet. By nightfall, rain began again, thin and cold, the same kind of rain that had once brought them beneath one umbrella. This time, she walked through it alone. He found her at the river bank. The water below was dark as ink, carrying pale fragments of old prayers toward the unseen sea. She stood near the edge, hair loosened by rain, medicine case hanging from one shoulder, looking smaller than she had in any battlefield. She did not turn around when he approached. "You shouldn't have followed me." His voice was quiet. "You left poorly hidden traces." A faint laugh escaped her, breaking almost immediately. "I wanted you to find me," she whispered. "And I wanted you not to." The rain fell between them. He stopped a few steps away, close enough to reach her, far enough not to trap her. "Why?" Her fingers tightened around the strap of her medicine case. "Because if I stay, you'll lose everything. I already refused heaven. That is what scares me." She turned then, eyes bright with pain. "You were meant to ascend. You were meant to become something no one could touch. And now because of me, your cultivation is fractured. Heaven is watching you. The sects distrust you. And one day my soul may become the thing that destroys the world." Her voice trembled, but she did not look away. "I can't be the reason you fall." For a long time, he said nothing. The abyssal river roared below them. Black mist rose from the water, drawn faintly toward her silver soul. The sight made her flinch, as if her own existence had become a wound. Then he stepped closer. "Before I met you," he said, "I was already falling." She stilled. "I only did not know it, because heaven called it ascension." The words passed through the rain slowly, each one carrying the weight of all the roads behind them. Black jade palaces, lantern cities' warmth, the forgotten valleys' grief, river provinces' blood, the buried temples' truth. He looked at her, and this time there was no frost in his eyes, only fear. Only devotion, only the unbearable honesty of someone who had never learned how to hide the heart he had barely recovered. "You think you took my future," he said, "but you were the first person who made me want one." Her breath caught. The rain softened. He reached into his sleeve and revealed the cracked crane charm. He had taken it before following her. The frost thread still bound it together, trembling faintly with his chest. "This is broken," he said, "but I kept it." His hand closed around it carefully. "So if you believe being broken means you must be abandoned, then teach me where I should leave this to." Tears finally slipped down her face, indistinguishable from rain. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I am afraid." His voice lowered. "So am I." That confession changed everything. The white calamity, heaven's blade, the boy raised to sever fear from his soul, stood before her beneath the rain and admitted he was afraid. Not of death, not of heaven, of losing her. The river wind surged between them, carrying black mist toward the cliffs. Her silver chest stirred in response, unstable and luminous. For one terrifying moment, the seal within her chest pulsed, and faint hollow voices whispered from the water. She stepped back instinctively. He stepped forward. Not to restrain her, to stand with her. The mist touched his sleeve and froze. Her eyes widened. "You'll be corrupted, then pull me back. I might fail. Then I will wait until you try again." Her face broke with the kind of sorrow that had no defense against tenderness. He lifted the cracked crane charm and tied it, not to his sword this time, but around her wrist with a thread of pale jet. The charm rested against her pulse, wooden wings trembling in the rain. I cannot promise the world will forgive us, he said. I cannot promise heaven will stop hunting us. I cannot promise your soul will never break. His fingers remained around her wrist, cold but gentle. But I can promise this, if the world wants you dead, then the world can stand behind me. The words entered her like dawn entering a sealed room. For so long, she had believed love meant leaving before she became someone's ruin. She had healed strangers, purified grief, smiled to exhaustion, and carried the fear that her existence itself was dangerous. But here, beneath a storm over the abyssal river, someone finally looked at all of her, the healer, the seal, the girl, the possible catastrophe, and chose to stay. She stepped into him before courage could fail. His arms closed around her slowly, carefully, as though he still could not believe he was allowed to hold something precious without destroying it. For a moment, neither spoke. The rain fell around them. The black river roared below. Silver light and winter chair wrapped together beneath the storm, not devouring each other, not yet becoming destiny, only existing side by side in fragile defiance. Her forehead rested against his shoulder. I don't want to leave, she whispered. His eyes closed. Then don't. The heart-severing art stirred weakly in protest. For the first time, he did not fight it. He simply let her warmth remain. And deep within his fractured spiritual core, something changed. Not a breakthrough. Not ascension. Something quieter and far more dangerous. A vow. By morning, the rain had stopped. They returned from the abyssal river together, walking beneath the same faded lotus umbrella she had left behind, and he had brought with him. Her wrist carried the cracked crane charm. His sword looked strangely bare without it. But he did not feel incomplete. The distance between their footsteps was gone. Far above the mortal clouds, heaven marked them both as lost. But on the mountain path below, as sunlight touched the wet leaves and the world smelled briefly clean, the two of them walked side by side. No longer as executioner and healer, but as two souls who had chosen each other against the fate of heaven itself. By noon, every sect had received the heavenly warrant. Their names were written together. His, beneath the title of traitor. Hers, beneath the title of calamity vessel. The paper burned with divine gold, declaring that the former executioner had betrayed heaven, sheltered the forbidden seal, and endangered the stability of all realms. Any sect that captured them would receive heavenly merit. Any sect that aided them would share their punishment. Across the cultivation world, gates closed. Spirit cranes turned away from mountain paths. Inns refused shelter. Old allies lowered their eyes. Even villages they had saved whispered in fear when the warrant appeared on temple walls, its golden characters brighter than ordinary truth. At first, the girl tried to hide how deeply it hurt. She smiled at frightened children who clung to their parents. She bowed to innkeepers who begged them to leave before patrols arrived. She kept her sleeve lower over the cracked white crane charm tied around her wrist, as if even that fragile proof of being chosen might invite disaster. He saw everything. Since the abyssal river, there was no distance between them left to hide behind. That evening, they rested in a peach grove beyond the border of River Province. Wine moved through the branches, scattering pale petals across their worn robes. The same blossoms that had once witnessed his first smile now fell like quiet farewell letters from a gentler world. She sat beneath a tree, looking at the heavenly warrant in her hands. Maybe they are not completely wrong, she said. He stopped beside her. The sunset colored his white robes with faint gold, softening the coldness heaven had carved into him. His sword hung at his side without the crane charm now, strangely bare, yet his presence felt steadier than before. They are afraid, he said. So am I. I know. That answer broke something small inside her. Not because it hurt, because he did not deny her fear. He did not cover it with promises too large for the world. He simply stood there and accepted it as part of her, the way he had accepted the seal, the darkness, the possible ruin. She lowered the warrant. What if choosing me makes everyone hate you? His gaze moved past the grove, toward distant mountains where sex signal fires already burned. Then they will hate me as myself. For a long time, the petals fell between them. Then he knelt before her and took her hand, the one wearing the cracked crane charm. His fingers were cold, but the gesture was careful, almost reverent. I was loved by no one when the world feared me, he said quietly. Now the world fears me again. But this time, I am not empty. Her eyes trembled. Above them, the first stars appeared. When the sect pursuers arrived, their lanterns lit the grove in harsh blue light. Disciples surrounded the trees with drawn swords, their elders standing behind them in judgmental silence. Someone shouted for him to surrender the girl. Someone else called her the source of disaster. The old him would have answered with slaughter. The new him did not. He rose, placing himself before her, but his sword remained sheathed. "She is not yours to judge," he said, "and you are no longer heaven's blade." An elder replied. For the first time, the faintest smile touched his mouth, not warm like beneath the peach blossoms, but calm, certain, free. "No," he said, "I am not." The girl stood beside him instead of behind him. Silver light unfolded around her, not as a weapon, but as a vow. "'Tis winter," she answered, wrapping gently around it, two powers the world believed should never coexist. The grove filled with wind. Petals rose around them like a storm of pale stars. They did not run because they were afraid. They ran because their future still existed somewhere beyond the hatred of heaven and sex. Hand in hand, they vanished through the rain of blossoms, leaving behind a shattered heavenly warrant and a world that had finally chosen to hunt them together. Above the clouds, heaven was not silent. It only pretended to be. They reached the outer veil of the heavenly court on the seventh night after fleeing the peach grove, following a trail of divine seals hidden within the warrant itself. The girl had noticed at first the golden decree did not merely condemn them. It pulsed faintly with the same rhythm as the black jade altar beneath the forbidden's temple, like two distant wounds answering each other. So they climbed. Past storm belts where thunder dragons slept within violet clouds. Past floating ruins abandoned by sex, erased from history. Past stairways made of frozen moonlight, where every step tried to pull forgotten grief from the soul. The higher they went, the colder his meridians became. The heart-severing arc recognized this place. It welcomed him home. But the hand holding his did not let go. The girl walked beside him beneath the endless white sky, the cracked crane charm around her wrist flickering with his pale check. Silver light rose from her skin whenever heaven's pressure grew too heavy, and each time it did, the surrounding clouds recoiled not from corruption, but from recognition, as if heaven remembered her, as if it feared what she might see. At the summit of the cloud stair stood no palace, no throne, no grand immortal gate, only a lake. It spread endlessly across the sky, still as polished glass, reflecting not their faces, but the mortal world below. Lantern City, Forgotten Valley, River Province, to Peach Grove, villages burning, mothers praying, children laughing, lovers parting, disciples kneeling, sect elders calculating losses beneath golden lamps. All of humanity shimmered beneath that heavenly surface. The girl stepped closer, breath caught in her throat. "What is this?" The executioner looked into the lake, and something inside him went cold in a way no technique had ever caused. "This is where heaven watches." The surface rippled, then the lake opened. Memories rose from its depths, vast and merciless. He saw the first stage of cultivation, when mortals discovered that emotion could shape Chet. Joe became healing light. Grief became rivers of spiritual power. Love bound souls across lifetimes. Rage split mountains. Hope awakened dormant stars. Humanity had not been weak then. It had been terrifyingly alive. Then came the catastrophe. Not because emotions existed, but because heaven feared where they might lead. Mortals who loved too deeply reached domains no immortal law could predict. Cultivators who grieved reshaped reincarnation. A mother's prayer once stopped a heavenly tribulation meant to erase her child. A dying disciple's devotion created a sore intent powerful enough to wound an immortal sovereign. Uncontrolled emotion did not merely create hollow spirits. It created possibility. And possibility could not be ruled. The girl's hand tightened around his. The lake darkened. They saw heaven descend not as savior, but as architect. The heavenly court sealed emotional cultivation beneath doctrine. It taught sex that attachment caused deviation, that mercy weakened ascension, that love bound a soul to dust. Techniques like the heart-severing art were spread as sacred paths. Generations of cultivators cut away themselves willingly, believing emptiness was enlightenment. And when grief accumulated in the places heaven abandoned, when suppressed sorrow rotted into hollow spirits, heaven pointed to those monsters and said, "See, emotion is the enemy." The executioner could not breathe. He saw children taken into black jade halls, disciples with bright eyes taught to kneel before cold bells. Himself, younger, silent, bleeding through meridian trials, while elders praised the beauty of his empty gaze. He saw every life yet ended in heaven's name. Not all innocent, not all guilty, all useful to a lie. His fingers went numb. The heart-severing arc convulsed inside him, not in punishment this time, but in recognition of its origin. A chain, not a path. a cage polished until it looked like divinity. The girl staggered beside him as the lake showed the final truth. The ancient catastrophe had not begun from her soul. Her previous incarnation had been the one who tried to stop it. The silver seal was not a source of ruin. It was the last mercy of an age heaven buried, a soul that had gathered humanity's grief and held it back when the heavens chose control over compassion. Her knees weakened. He caught her before she fell. For so long she had feared herself as the wound in the world, that the lake reflected something unbearable. She had been the bandage pressed over it, lifetime after lifetime, blamed for the blood she had tried to contain. Tears slipped down her face, silent and stunned. "I'm not the catastrophe," she whispered. "No," he said, voice rough with something too deep to be anger alone. "You were the one they used to hide it." The lake trembled. Behind them, the clouds parted. The heavenly sovereign stood upon the sky, robed in white untouched by time. Around him, immortal elders appeared like stars sharpening into blades. Their faces held no guilt, no shame, only the calm certainty of rulers who had mistaken control for salvation. "You understand only fragments," the sovereign said. The executioner slowly rose, keeping the girl behind him, though her silver light remained beside his winter chair rather than beneath it. The sovereign looked down at the mortal world reflected in the lake. Emotion breeds rebellion. Rebellion breeds suffering. Suffering breeds hollow spirits. "We offered order. You offered fear," the girl said, her voice trembling but clear. "For survival." The executioner looked at the sovereign then, and in his eyes burned Lantern City's warmth, the forgotten valleys' names, River Province's rain, the peach blossoms where he had first smiled, and the abyssal river where fear had become confession. "All this time," he said quietly, "you were not protecting humanity from emotion." Frost spread across the lake. "You were protecting heaven from humanity." For the first time, the sovereign's expression changed, only slightly, but heaven itself seemed to darken. The immortals raised their hands. Divine chains descended from the clouds, each engraved with laws meant to bind soul, memory, and desire. The heart-severing art inside him responded like a traitorous echo, trying one last time to kneel. The girl stepped forward and placed her hand over his chest. Not to restrain him, to remind him he was not alone. Her silver chain entered the cracks of his spiritual core, not healing them closed, but filling them with warmth. The pain remained, the fear remained, the grief remained, and for the first time, he did not want them gone. The chains fell. He drew his sword. Winter met heaven. The lake exploded into countless reflections, each shard carrying a human memory heaven had tried to suppress. A mother laughing with her child. A disciple mourning his master. An old woman sharing rice. A girl beneath rain bandaging the hand of a bow no one had touched without fear. He did not fight to win that night. Not yet. He fought to escape with the truth. His sword carved open the cloud veil. The girl's silver light shielded the memories as they scattered downward like falling stars, carrying forbidden's history toward the mortal world. As they descended through the broken sky, heaven's wrath thundered behind them. But below, across distant provinces, people looked up. They saw silver stars falling through the night, and with them came dreams, fragments of the truth above the clouds. The executioner held the girl close as they fell toward the mortal realm, his expression no longer cold, no longer empty, but shaken by a fury born from grief and love. The world beneath them would never be the same. Neither would he, because the greatest lie of heaven had finally been revealed. Humanity had not failed because it felt too much. It had suffered because heaven taught it to feel alone. They fell from heaven into winter. Not the sacred frost of black jade palaces, but mortal snow soft, uneven, carried by wind across an abandoned mountain shrine. Broken tiles slept beneath white drifts. Old prayer bells hung from cedar branches, ringing faintly whenever the storm breathed through them. He landed on one knee, sword buried in the snow. The girl landed beside him, silver light fading around her shoulders. The memories they had stolen from the heavenly lake scattered across the night sky behind them, falling toward distant provinces like forbidden stars. For a moment, they had escaped. Then the silence reached him. Not outside, inside. The heart-severing art, the technique that had shaped every breath of his life, no longer felt like power. It felt like a hand around his throat. He looked at his own fingers. These hands had held a sword before they had ever held warmth. These hands had executed heaven's judgments, shattered families, silenced witnesses, severed grief before it could become rebellion. Every step he had believed was ascension had been a path designed by those who fear what a human heart might become. The white calamity, heaven's blade, perfect immortal, All names given to a cage. Snow gathered on his sleeves. The girl reached toward him carefully. "You're bleeding." He almost laughed. The words were the same as the first time they met beneath the rain pavilion, but now he no longer knew whether the wound she saw was on his body, his soul, or the life he had mistaken for his own. "I don't know what part of me was ever real," he said. His voice was calm. That made it worse. The girl froze. He stood slowly, and the snow around him crystallized into sharp frost. His chest slipped out in broken waves, no longer clean, no longer perfectly controlled. The shrine pillars cracked. The old bells trembled wildly overhead. "I thought I chose silence because it made me strong." His eyes lowered, but even that choice was given to me. The memories from the heavenly lake returned in fragments, a younger version of himself kneeling in black jade halls, elders praising his empty gaze, the first time he cut down someone who cried for mercy, the way he had felt nothing because heaven had taught him feeling was failure. His hand tightened around his sword. "What am I without their design?" The girl stepped through the frost. It cut lightly against her sleeves, but she did not stop. The cracked crane charm on her wrist glowed faintly, bound by his own che, proof of a choice heaven had not commanded. "You are the person who lowered his sword in Lantern City," she said. "The person who protected River Province. The person who followed me to the Abyssal River." His expression trembled, barely. "Those moments came after you. Then let them count." The frost storm faltered. She came close enough to place her hand over his, not forcing him to release the sword, only reminding him that it was not the only thing his hand could hold. "You were used," she whispered. "That does not mean everything you become belongs to them." The words entered him slowly, painfully, like warmth returning to frozen limbs. Outside the broken shrine, dawn began to stain the horizon. Far below the mountain, villages stirred beneath the falling forbidden stars, and for the first time, the world was waking to a truth heaven had buried. He looked toward that distant light. He did not feel whole, not redeemed, not free, but the question inside him had changed. Not, what was I made to be? But, what will I choose now? The snow continued falling. This time, he let it touch his face. They found peace in a place too small for history to remember. It was a mountain village, hidden between cedar forests and terrace fields, where snow melted into clear streams and smoke rose gently from clay rooftops at dawn. No sect banner flew there. No heavenly warrant had reached its shrine wall. To the villagers, they were only two travelers seeking shelter before the roads froze. For 3 days, the world allowed them to breathe. The girl helped an old herbalist sort dried roots beneath the eaves, her sleeves tied neatly, the cracked crane charm resting against her wrist. Children followed her through the village because she smiled when they asked questions. Sometimes, when she laughed, the young man would look up from sharpening his sword beneath the cedar tree, as if the sound had touched something deeper than hearing. He was quieter after learning heaven's truth. Not cold, unfinished. Some evenings, frost still gathered around his fingers when old memories returned. When that happened, she would sit beside him without speaking, close enough for their shoulders to touch. The frost would not vanish immediately, but it would soften. That was enough. On the second night, the villagers invited them to dinner. The food was plain steamed rice, river fish, wild greens, hot tea poured into chip bowls. No one knew they had defied heaven. No one knew the man eating silently beside the fire had once been called Calamity. An old woman pushed extra rice toward him. "You're too thin," she said. The girl lowered her head, smiling into her tea. He stared at the bowl for a moment, remembering another grandmother, another village, the first time ordinary kindness had felt more frightening than battle. Then he accepted it. Later, beneath a sky crowded with stars, they walked to the edge of the fields. Far beyond the mountains, faint red signal fires marked the coming war. Heaven was gathering. The sects were choosing sides. The fallen memories from the cloud lake had already begun changing the world. But here, the wind smelled of cedar and snow. The girl looked toward the village lights. What would you do if all of this ended? He did not answer quickly. Once, his future had been a throne of ice above the heavens. Now, when he imagined tomorrow, he saw smaller things. A quiet house, rain on tiled roofs, her medicine herbs drying by the window, a sword left untouched for days. "Somewhere near water," he said at last, "where no one bows." She looked at him, and he turned slightly, the faintest warmth entering his eyes. "And you would complain that I walk too fast." Her smile trembled. Above them, the stars shone like lanterns that had survived the dark. For one fragile night, Before war claimed the horizon, they let themselves believe peace was not merely something to protect. It was something they might one day live. The warning came on the fourth morning, when the village stream froze under sunlight. No winter wind had passed through, no snow had fallen, yet the clear water hardened from bank to bank, trapping fallen cedar leaves beneath crystal-like memories sealed under glass. He stood beside the stream, silent. The girl watched from behind him, the cracked crane charm cold against her wrist. His cultivation had reached its threshold. The fractured spiritual core within him, damaged by hesitation, fear, love, and defiance, was trying to complete itself. Once, this would have been the moment every cultivator dreamed of, the final step toward true immortality, the gate beyond mortal suffering. But heaven's path had never been free. That night, while the village slept beneath soft lantern light, an ancient immortal scripture awakened inside his inner sea. Golden characters rose one by one through the darkness of his soul, forming the final law of ascension. To become eternal, sever all mortal attachment. A vision unfolded before him. He saw himself standing above the nine heavens, untouched by time, untouched by grief. His sword no longer trembled. His heart no longer ached. The girl's face became distant, then blur, then disappeared completely. Lantern City faded. The forgotten valley faded. River Province's rain faded. The warmth of shared tea. The umbrella beneath bamboo rain. The dream of a house near water, all of it dissolved into flawless peace. He would be perfect. He would be empty. His eyes opened before dawn. Frost covered the floor around him. The girl was awake across the room, sitting beside the dying hearth. She did not ask what he had seen. Perhaps he already knew. Perhaps love had made silence between them more honest than words. Outside, the village prepared for spring planting, unaware that heaven's oldest law had entered their small refuge. He walked with her to the terraced fields as morning mist lifted from the mountains. Children laughed near the stream, trying to break the impossible ice with sticks. The old woman who had given him extra rice waved from her doorway. All of it looked painfully fragile. The girl stopped beneath a cedar tree. "If this is your chance to survive what's coming," she said softly, "you should not refuse because of me." He turned toward her. Her voice remained steady, but her fingers had closed tightly around the crane charm. He understood then that she was trying to be brave in the cruelest way, by offering him a future without her. The old him would have accepted eternity without hesitation. The man before her could not even imagine it without feeling something inside him tear. "If I forget you," he said, "then the one who survives will not be me." Her eyes reddened. Above them, the frozen stream cracked faintly under the sun. The path to immortality had opened before him like a white road into endless sky, but beyond it waited no rain, no lanterns, no warmth, no sorrow, no her. Only heaven's perfect silence. He looked at the mortal village, then at the girl who had taught him why such small lives mattered. For the first time, ascension looked less like salvation, and more like death wearing light. The ascension gate opened above the mountain village at dusk. It did not arrive with thunder, it arrived with silence. The clouds parted into a vast white road stretching toward the heavens, each step formed from frozen light and ancient law. Golden characters circled the sky like divine scripture, repeating the same command that had haunted his inner sea since dawn. Sever attachment. Abandon grief. Become eternal. The villagers gathered below, frightened by a miracle they could not understand. Children clutched their parents. The old woman who had given him extra rice stood beneath the cedar tree, her wrinkled hands folded tightly around a prayer bee. The girl stood beside him at the edge of the frozen stream. The cracked crane charm around her wrist trembled violently, reacting to the heavenly pressure. Silver light flickered beneath her skin, unstable but warm, as if the ancient seal within her soul recognized the gate as something that had once taken too much from humanity. He looked up at the road of light. For most cultivators, this was destiny. For him, it was a sentence. The heart-severing art awakened fully inside his spiritual core, not broken now, but resplendent. The cracks that love and fear had carved through it began to close under heavenly law. Pain faded from his meridians. His breathing steadied, his emotions dulled at the edges. It would be easy. That was what frightened him most. One step, and the ache of River Province would disappear. Another, and the girl's tears at the abyssal river would lose their meaning. Another, and the dream of a house near water would become something foolish and mortal, beneath the concern of an immortal. The girl reached for his sleeve, then stopped herself. He saw the movement. Her hand hovered in the air for a heartbeat before falling back to her side. "Go," she whispered. The word barely survived the wind. His gaze shifted from the ascension gate to her face. She was smiling. Not because she wanted him to leave, because she loved him enough to pretend. That false smile hurt more than the heart-severing art ever had. The heavenly road lowered before him. Frost-white petals of divine light gathered around his feet. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for heaven's perfect blade to return to its proper path. He stepped forward. The girl closed her eyes. The first step touched the road of light. At once, the sky opened inside him. Power flooded his body in endless waves. His spiritual core shone like a star refined of all impurity. The pain of his fractures vanished. Memories loosened one by one, becoming pale and distant. A rain pavilion. A medicine cup. A shared umbrella. A white crane kite. A hand cold in his palm beside a burning river. He felt them fading. Peace approached. Perfect. Empty. Merciless. Then, from below, a child began to cry. Not loudly, just a small, frightened sound from the village crowd. He looked down. The old woman held the child close, whispering comfort. The girl stood alone beside the frozen stream, her hand pressed over the cracked crane charm, silver light trembling around her like moonlight about to break. All these mortal things, brief, fragile, imperfect, and worth more than eternity. His foot stopped on the second step. He finally understood. Heaven had not demanded that he abandon weakness. It had demanded that he abandon meaning. Slowly, he turned away from the ascension road. The golden characters in the sky froze. The heavenly sovereign's voice descended from beyond the gate, vast and cold. Do not be foolish. This is the final mercy heaven offers you. He looked upward, white robes stirring in the wind, eyes calm but no longer empty. If becoming immortal means forgetting why I wish to live, he said, then heaven was never worthy of me. The world trembled. He raised his sword. The blade that had once executed heaven's judgment now pointed toward the ascension gate itself. Frost gathered along its edge, but beneath the frost burned something warmer. Lantern cities light, forgotten valleys grief, river provinces rain, the girl's hand in his, the dream of somewhere near water where no one bowed. Heaven's law crashed down. Chains of golden scripture wrapped around his limbs, piercing into his meridians, forcing obedience into his bones. The heart-severing art screamed inside him, trying to preserve the path, trying to close the cracks, trying to make him perfect. He smiled faintly, not with joy, with release. Then he drove his sword into his own spiritual core. Light exploded. The villagers cried out as the ascension road shattered across the sky. Golden scripture broke into countless fragments, falling like burning snow over the mountain fields. The frozen stream split open beneath his feet. The cedar trees bent under the force of a law being rejected from within. He did not destroy his life. He destroyed the path heaven had built inside it. The perfect immortal foundation collapsed. His cultivation plunged into chaos. Blood darkened his lips. Frost and golden light tore through his robes. Every meridian felt as though it were being unmade and remade by pain. But his memories remained. The girl ran to him before anyone else could move. He fell into her arms. For the first time, she held him the way he had held her at River Province, terrified, desperate, refusing to let go. You idiot, she whispered, tears breaking through her voice. You impossible idiot. His hand lifted weakly to the crane charm on her wrist. It did not fall, he murmured. She wept then, opally, with her forehead pressed against his. Above them, the shattered ascension gate burned away into twilight. Far beyond the clouds, heaven's wrath gathered. But below, the villagers saw something no scripture had ever described. A cultivator who had refused immortality and somehow seemed more alive for it. The old woman knelt first, not in worship, in gratitude. Others followed, not before heaven, not before power, but before the impossible tenderness of someone who had chosen love over eternity. The girl pressed silver chain into his ruined core, trembling as she tried to steady the chaos within him. His cultivation would never return to what it had been. The perfect path was gone. The heart-severing art lay broken like a dead chain in his soul. Yet within the ruins, something unfamiliar stirred. Not heavenly law, not ascension. A seed, small as candlelight, warm as shared rice, fragile as a paper lantern rising through rain. His own Tao. The sky darkened with distant thunder, but the mountain village remained lit by falling fragments of the broken gate. They drifted around the two of them like stars descending to earth. He opened his eyes and looked at her. No divine emptiness remained, only pain, love, fear, and quiet certainty. I chose, he said. She held him tighter. And beneath the ruined heavens, amid burning snow and mortal lanterns, the man once shaped to become heaven's perfect immortal was reborn through refusal. Not as a god, not as a weapon, but as someone human enough to love, and strong enough to bear the cost. The war began when the sky refused to close. For 3 days after the Ascension Gate shattered, fragments of golden law drifted above the mortal world like burning snow. Villagers gathered them in clay bowls. Sect disciples caught them in trembling palms. Old cultivators up when the fragments touched their skin, because each shard carried a memory heaven had once buried. A mother's prayer stopping tribulation, a disciple's grief becoming sword intent, a lover's vow crossing reincarnation. The world remembered, and heaven answered. At dawn on the 4th day, the clouds split from east to west. Black jade palaces descended through the wound in the sky, vast and silent, their roofs crowned with frost-white banners. Immortal soldiers stood upon stairways of light, armor shining like frozen stars. Behind them, divine chains uncoiled across the heavens, each link engraved with laws meant to bind emotion, memory, rebellion, and love. The heavenly sovereign's decree rolled across every province. Surrender the seal. Surrender the traitor. Return to order. No sect could pretend neutrality after that. Some knelt. Many hesitated. And then, from Lantern City, an old woman lit a festival lantern in daylight. 1 lantern became 10. 10 became thousands. By sunset, lanterns rose from villages, rivers, ruins, and mountain gates, small mortal flames rising toward an immortal army. Not all belonged to rebels. Some belonged to the fearful. Some to the grieving, some to people who did not understand heaven's crimes completely, but had seen enough to know silence had become complicity. The girl stood on the mountain ridge where the Ascension Gate had broken, watching the lanterns rise. The cracked crane charm around her wrist glowed softly. Beside her, the man who had refused immortality leaned on his sword. His spiritual core was ruined, unstable, threaded with pain. The flawless cold that once made him heaven's perfect blade was gone. In its place, something unfinished flickered inside him, fragile warmth beneath broken frost. You cannot fight like before, she said. I know, you might die. His gaze moved across the distant lanterns. So might they. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, fear remained there, but it no longer ruled her. Then we protect what we can. Below the ridge, the first rebel coalition gathered. It was not glorious. It was wounded, uneven, uncertain. Farmers stood beside wandering cultivators. River Province survivors carried patched banners. Disciples from minor sects arrived in secret after abandoning elders who had chosen heaven. Even some great sects split in two, brother against brother, master against student, loyalty against conscience. Cloud Mirror Summit burned that night. Not by hollow spirits. By human chose. The Azure Sword sect raised its blue banner against the heavenly court. Crimson Lotus Valley closed its gates and handed over refugees. Black Tortoise Hall swore loyalty to divine order. Across the world, alliances shattered like thin ice beneath spring rivers. War had come not only from above. It bloomed in every heart forced to choose. The first battle fell upon River Province. Heaven sent immortal generals down the same waterway where the girl had nearly died protecting civilians. Their chariots crossed the clouds, drawn by spirit beasts with antlers of lightning. Divine drums shook the river banks. Golden chains plunged into the water, turning the clean river back into a prison of law. The girl stood on the western bridge, the place she had once shielded with her body. This time, she did not stand alone. Villagers lined the banks with lanterns. Cultivators formed defensive arrays beside fishermen. Children were carried toward the hills while old men refused to leave the docks. Above them, the immortal army descended like judgment carved in light. The first chain struck. The man stepped forward. His sword rose. The impact drove him to one knee, blood darkening his lids, but the chain stopped before touching the bridge. Frost spread from his blade, not pure and emotionless as before, but uneven, alive, threaded with the warmth of every lantern reflected in the river below. His broken core screamed. He stood anyway, the girl's silver chair wrapped around him, not healing the wound completely, but holding him together. Around her, the ancient seal awakened not as a burden, but as remembrance. The souls of forgotten ages shimmered behind her like moonlit silhouettes, all those who had once loved, grieved, fought, and been buried by heaven's doctrine. The immortal general looked down from his chariot. You stand with mortals. The man smiled faintly through the pain. I learned from them. Then River Province answered, not with one great technique, but with 1,000 imperfect lights. Sword cultivators struck beside herbalists. Children's lanterns strengthened protection arrays. Grief became shield. Hope became flame. Love became the stubborn will to keep one another alive. For the first time in history, heaven's chains cracked under mortal emotion. The battle did not end cleanly. No war did. Bridges collapsed. Sect disciples fell into the river. Immortal light burned through villages they had rebuilt with their own hands. The man fought until his sword arm shook. The girl purified hollow che until silver tears streaked her cheeks. When night came, the river carried both lanterns and ashes. But River Province did not fall, and that was enough. News spread like wildfire. The heavenly court could bleed. Across the cultivation world, hidden rebellions ignited. Forgotten Valley became a sanctuary where named tablets were rebuilt. Lantern City turned its canals into mirror rays that reflected divine chains back toward the sky. In the blue bamboo forest, wandering cultivators laid traps beneath rain-soaked paths. At the small mountain village where he had refused ascension, the old woman organized refugees with more authority than most sect masters. The war grew vast, mythological, terrible. Immortals descended upon floating mountains. Ancient beasts awakened beneath spirit seas. Sect ancestors left sealed caves after centuries of meditation, only to find the world they had abandoned fighting without them. The sky filled with swords, dragons, broken palaces, and falling stars. Through it all, he and the girl moved like the center of an unfinished legend. Not invincible, never untouched. He bled more often now. The destroy ascension path had cost him heaven's perfection. Sometimes his chet failed mid-battle, and she would catch him before he fell. Sometimes the seal within her soul trembled near collapse, and he would stand before her until she remembered how to breathe. They survived because neither fought alone anymore. One night, after a battle beneath a shattered moon bridge, they rested among refugees in a ruined temple. Rain leaked through the roof. Children slept under patch cloaks. Outside, distant thunder marked another heavenly army crossing the clouds. The girl cleaned blood from his hand with the same gentleness she had shown in the first rain pavilion. "You keep using your body as if it is still immortal," she murmured. "It never was." She looked up. He met her gaze, tired but calm. "I only believed it because they told me pain meant nothing." Her fingers paused. And now, he glanced toward the sleeping refugees, toward the lanterns sheltered carefully from the rain. "Now pain reminds me what must not be lost." She lowered her head, but he saw her tears fall onto his hand before she could hide them. He turned his palm and held hers. Outside, heaven's armies gathered. Inside, among the wounded and frightened, their hands remained joined. The war would not be won that night, perhaps not for years. Heaven still held the highest palaces, the oldest laws, the coldest immortals. The sects remained divided. Hollow spirits still rose wherever despair overflowed. But something irreversible had begun. The cultivation world was no longer asking whether heaven could be challenged. It was asking what kind of world might exist after heaven fell. And beneath a broken temple roof, surrounded by rain, lanterns, refugees, and the quiet breathing of those still alive, the two of them understood the true shape of the war at last. It was not merely mortals against immortals. It was not merely love against law. It was every fragile human feeling heaven had tried to bury rising together, wounded and afraid, but unwilling to kneel again. The human Tao was not born in victory. It began in a field of exhausted lanterns after the third siege of River Province, where the rain had turned the soul black and the wounded slept beneath torn banners from sects that once called each other enemies. Dawn came slowly over the battlefield, pale and uncertain, touching broken swords, extinguished talismans, and bowls of cold medicine left beside those who had not woken. He sat alone beside the river. His sword lay across his knees. Once, meditation had been simple. Empty the mind, sever disturbance. Let emotion fall away like snow from a blade. The heart-severing art had taught him that clarity came from absence, that power belonged to those who could become untouchable. Now, when he closed his eyes, nothing disappeared. He heard Lantern City's festival song. He saw the Forgotten Valley's named tablets rising from mud. He felt the girl's cold fingers in his palm beneath River Province rain. He remembered the old woman pushing rice toward him, the child calling him big brother, the cracked crane charm tied around a trembling wrist. Each memory hurt, each memory pulled, each memory refused to be severed. His ruined core trembled under the weight of them. Frost spread across his sleeves, then faltered. Golden remnants of the destroy ascension path flickered in his meridians like dying stars, still trying to form a road back to heaven's silence. But below the pain, something else answered. Not law, not technique. A pulse, faint at first, then another. Around him, the sleeping camp breathed. A soldier murmured a name in his dreams. A child clutched a lantern that had gone out hours ago. The girl stood beneath the shrine roof, quietly grinding herbs despite the fatigue in her hands. Every life nearby carried fear, longing, grief, hope. Ordinary emotions, mortal emotions, the things heaven had called weakness. His inner sea stirred. For the first time, he did not push them away. He let the memories enter. Tain struck first. River Province, her body falling through the burning sky, his own voice begging her to stay. The wound opened inside him again, raw and unbearable. He endured it. Then came warmth, peach blossoms, sweet rice dumplings, a white crane kite catching wind. Her laughter in the abandoned shrine when she told him he did not know how to share an umbrella. He accepted that too. Then came guilt. The faces of those he had executed before he knew how to hesitate. The witnesses he had almost killed in Lantern City. The countless names heaven had buried beneath doctrine. He did not forgive himself. He simply did not look away. The river before him began to glow. Not with frost, with reflected lantern light. One by one, extinguished lanterns across the battlefield rekindled without flame. Their paper bodies lifted gently from the mud, glowing with faint colors drawn from the hearts of those nearby: blue sorrow, gold courage, red devotion, silver remembrance. The wounded woke. The air warmed. Even the river, scarred by divine chains, flowed clearer beneath the morning mist. The girl looked up. She felt it before anyone else did. His chest had changed again. No longer heaven's cold perfection. No longer the unstable ruin left after rejected ascension. It moved like breath shared between countless living beings, fragile alone, immeasurable together. She walked toward him slowly. The cracked crane charm on her wrist shone with the same light. "What are you doing?" she whispered. He opened his eyes. There were tears in them. He did not hide them. "I don't know," he said, "but for the first time, it feels like mine." Above the battlefield, the clouds parted. Heaven noticed. Divine pressure descended at once, violent and absolute. Golden chains emerged from the sky, drawn by the birth of an unauthorized path. Immortal law could tolerate rebellion. It could tolerate heresy. But a new Tao was something far more dangerous. A new Tao meant humanity no longer needed heaven to define power. The chains fell toward him. He did not raise his sword. Instead, he stood and looked back at the camp, at the wounded, the fearful, the angry, the grieving, the ones who had lost too much and still lit lanterns for others, the ones who trembled and fought anyway. His voice was quiet, but it reached them all. "Do not empty your hearts." The chains descended faster. "Remember." The girl stepped beside him, silver cham furling around her like moonlight. She did not shield him from the emotions gathering. She helped them flow. Lanterns rose from every hand. Memories answered across the camp. A mother remembered the child heaven's decree had named expendable. A disciple remembered his master smiling before death. An old fisherman remembered River Province before the flames. A young swordswoman remembered why she first picked up a blade not for glory, but to protect her little brother. Those memories became light. Not purified, not tameless, true. The golden chain struck the field and shattered. For one breath, even heaven was silent. The man who had once been the white calamity stood amid 1,000 floating lanterns, his ruined core no longer collapsing, but rebuilding around something heaven could not command. His cultivation did not rise like a tower toward the sky. It spread outward, rooting into bonds, into names, into grief shared rather than hidden, into love chosen despite fear. The human Tao awakened, not above the world, within it. Across the battlefield, cultivators felt their own cherished bond. Techniques long warped by suppression softened. Sword intent deepened when grief was acknowledged instead of severed. Healing arts strengthened through compassion rather than detachment. Even exhausted mortals, holding lanterns with shaking hands, felt warmth move through them like dawn. The girl watched him through silver-lit tears. For so long, she had feared that her soul was a seal meant only to contain catastrophe. But now her light moved with his, not as a prison, but as a bridge. The grief of the world passed through her without devouring her, because it no longer had to be carried alone. He turned toward her. No heavenly crown rested above him, no immortal or erased his humanity. He looked tired, wounded, mortal enough to bleed and more powerful than he had ever been. "You were right," he said softly. Her lips trembled. "About what?" He looked at the lanterns rising into the morning sky. Emotions did not make them weak. The wind carried the lanterns upward, past torn banners and broken clouds, toward the place where heaven still waited with armies and laws. They made them impossible to control. Far above, black jade palaces trembled. Far below, the mortal world breathed differently. The war was not over. The greatest battles had yet to come. Heaven would answer with terror. Immortals would descend. The price of this new path would be paid in blood, tears, and choices neither of them could yet imagine. But something irreversible had entered existence. A cultivation path where love was not a flaw, where grief was not corruption, where memory was not a chain, where humanity itself became Tao. And beside the river that had once nearly taken her from him, he reached for the girl's hand. She gave it without hesitation. Together, beneath a sky filled with lanterns, they stood at the beginning of a power heaven had spent ages trying to prevent. Not because it was evil, but because it belonged to everyone. The sea of fallen immortals was not a sea until the sky broke. It began as a battlefield above the western horizon, where black jade palaces drifted like dead moons and the clouds beneath them churned with thunder. Heaven had gathered its oldest armies there, immortal generals whose names had once been prayers, law-bound beasts with antlers of lightning, and elders who had cut their hearts away so completely that even their shadows felt cold. Below them, the mortal coalition stood upon shattered floating mountains and broken sect ships, lanterns tied to spears, swords, medicine cases, and prayer staffs. They were fewer. They were frightened. But when the human Tao spread through the ranks like dawn through mist, no one knelt. The first immortal fell at sunrise. He had descended with a spear of golden laud, intending to bind the memories of an entire battlefield. The young man who had once been heaven's perfect blade met him above the clouds, sword in hand, ruined core burning with 1,000 borrowed lights. Their clash split the morning. Golden law pressed down like judgment. The human Tao answered with names. Lantern City, Forgotten Valley, River Province, the Mountain Village, the old woman's rice, the child's crane kite, the girl's hand beneath rain. His sword did not cut with emptiness anymore. It carried every reason he had refused to become immortal. The spear cracked. The immortal's body scattered into light. For a moment, everyone was silent. Then the light fell. It struck the clouds below and did not vanish. It gathered with the remains of other broken laws, melting into a vast silver-gold tide that spread beneath the battlefield. By noon, the sky had become an ocean. Immortals fell into it like stars. Some died with hatred frozen on their faces. Some reached for heaven and found no answer. Some, in their final breath, remembered emotions they had severed centuries ago: a sister's laughter, a master's hand, the fear of dying alone, and wept as they dissolved into the shining sea. The girl felt every one of them. Standing on the prow of a shattered sect ship, silver chaff flowing from her sleeves, she held the ancient seal open not as a prison, but as a mercy. The grief of falling immortals crashed against her soul in waves. Lives emptied by doctrine, longings buried beneath cultivation, the unbearable loneliness of those who had mistaken silence for transcendence. Her knees weakened. The cracked crane charm on her wrist burned bright. He reached her before she fell. His hand closed around hers, cold and steady. "Do not carry all of it," he said. Her eyes glistened with pain. "They forgot how to be human." "Then let them remember," he answered, "but not through you alone." Around them, lanterns rose from the mortal army. One by one, the living shared the weight. Grief moved through the human Tao, no longer concentrated in her fragile soul. A fisherman from River Province cried for an immortal he had never met. A swordswoman from Azure Sword Sect steadied her blade while tears ran down her face. Even children sheltering far below looked up as silver rain fell from the sky and whispered names they did not understand. The sea grew brighter, and heaven began to collapse. At first, only the outer palaces cracked. Black jade roofs split open, revealing halls where no warmth had entered for ages. Then the divine chains binding the cloud realm snapped one after another, each break releasing a sound like a bell finally allowed to mourn. The heavenly sovereign watched from the highest throne, expression calm, but the world beneath him had changed too much. Every fallen immortal fed the truth. Every shattered law freed another memory. Every mortal heart that refused emptiness weak and the foundation of heaven itself. The battle raged until sunset became impossible to distinguish from fire. Dragons of law curled through broken clouds. Spirit ships burned in midair. Sword light crossed the sky like white rivers. The man fought until blood soaked his sleeve and his breathing grew uneven, yet each time his strength faltered, another lantern rose behind him. Not worship, support. That was the difference heaven could not understand. He was no longer powerful because he stood above everyone. He endured because he was no longer alone. Near dusk, a palace collapsed into the sea of light. Its fall tore open the sky behind it, revealing the mortal world far below. Rivers, villages, forests, cities, all trembling beneath the war above. For one terrible moment, the sea began to descend toward them. If it fell, the world would drown in immortal grief. The girl stepped forward. "No," he said immediately. She looked at him, and despite the ruin around them, her expression was gentle. "I'm not trying to leave." Silver light unfolded from her soul, immense and aching, but this time it did not isolate her. The human Tao rose with it. Lanterns, memories, voices, vows all gathered around her like an ocean answering the moon. He stood beside her and drove his sword into the deck. Winter chest spread through the falling sea, not freezing it, but giving it shape. Her silver light guided the grief. His human Tao carried it outward. Together, they turned the collapsing tide into rain. Across the mortal world, silver gold droplets fell. Where they touched ruined villages, old hatred softened. Where they touched graves, restless spirits quieted. Where they touched sect disciples still fighting one another, swords lowered for a single breath as memories returned of why they had first sought strength. The rain did not end the war, but it saved the world from drowning. When night arrived, the sea of fallen immortals stretched across the heavens, luminous and sorrowful, reflecting countless broken stars. Bodies of law drifted through it like pale petals. Black jade fragments floated among lanterns. The old order was no longer whole. The girl leaned against him, exhausted beyond speech. He wrapped an arm around her, careful despite the blood on his hands. Below them, the mortal world looked up at a sky that had become a memorial. Heaven had not fallen yet, but it had begun to sink. And amid that terrible beauty, surrounded by the light of immortals who had finally remembered what they lost, the two of them understood the cost of changing the world. Victory would not be clean. Freedom would not be gentle. That the sea above them carried proof that even those who had severed their hearts were not beyond remembrance. And as long as something could remember, heaven could no longer call emptiness eternal. After the sea of fallen immortals, the world did not celebrate. It mourned. Silver gold rain fell for 7 days across the mortal realm, carrying the last memories of those who had severed their hearts too late. Fields glowed beneath sorrowful light. Rivers ran bright as broken stars. In every province, people looked upward and wept for strangers whose names they had never known. Victory had saved the world from drowning, but it had not saved it from pain. The man stood alone at the edge of the luminous sea, high above the clouds, where fragments of black jade palaces drifted like wreckage after a storm. Below him, the mortal world trembled. Even with the human Tao awakened, suffering had not vanished. Refugee roads stretched across burned valleys. Sect brothers buried one another. Children searched ruins for voices that would not answer. He heard all of it. The human Tao connected him to too many hearts. Every grief found him. Every prayer touched his ruined core. Every cry became a thread wrapped around his soul. For the first time since refusing ascension, he understood the temptation of emptiness. Not because he hated humanity, because he loved it too much. His sword hung loosely in his hand. The blade reflected no face, only the silver sea below and the endless sorrow within it. Heaven's old path whispered from the broken remnants of his core, faint but familiar. Sever it. No more fear. No more grief. No more trembling hands reaching for people he could not save. Only stillness. Only peace. The heavenly sovereign appeared across the sea, robes untouched by ash or rain. Behind him, the remaining palaces of heaven leaned in the wounded sky, cracked but not fallen. You see it now, the sovereign said. Emotion does not end suffering. It multiplies it. The man did not answer. The sea beneath them showed him everything. Lantern City rebuilt, then grieving again. River province saved, then scarred. The mountain village sheltering refugees until its rice stores empty. Warriors who had found courage through love, only to lose those they fought beside. Humanity was free to feel. And because it felt, it could break. The sovereign's voice softened into something almost gentle. Return to emptiness. Not for heaven, for them. End the cycle. Silence grief before it becomes another sea. For one terrible moment, the offer no longer sounded cruel. It sounded merciful. The man closed his eyes. He imagined a world without hollow spirits, without war, without the unbearable lake of farewell, a world where no child cried beneath burning skies, a world where no one loved deeply enough to be destroyed by loss. His fingers tightened around the sword. The human Tao flickered. Far below, lanterns dimmed across the battlefield. Then a hand touched his, warm, trembling, real. The girl stood beside him, exhausted from holding the grief of the fallen, silver light still staining her sleeves. The cracked crane charm rested against her wrist, glowing faintly through the mist. "You're listening to him," she whispered. His voice was almost hollow. "I hear them suffering. I know. I cannot save them all. I know." The simplicity of her answer wounded him more than denial would have. He looked at her then, and the mask heaven had once carved into him almost returned not from obedience, but from despair. Then what is the meaning of giving them emotions, if emotions only make pain deeper? The girl's eyes filled with tears. She did not answer quickly. She looked down at the mortal realm, at the lantern struggling against the dark, at the world they had loved enough to ruin heaven for. Then she said, "Because pain is not the only thing they feel." The sea trembled. Her silver chan folded, not in battle, but in memory. The human Da answered weakly. Images rose around them, not the horrors heaven had shown, but the moments between them. An old woman pushing rice into his bowl, children laughing beneath peach blossoms, a torn rabbit lantern held carefully in small hands, a village sharing thin soup with strangers, rain beneath one umbrella, a white crane kite rising crookly into blue sky, the girl smiling through exhaustion because someone else had survived. "Those moments were temporary too," she said. "Were they meaningless because they ended?" His breath caught. The sovereign's gaze darkened. "Temporary Joe cannot justify eternal suffering." The girl turned toward him, no longer trembling. "No. But neither can fear justify stealing every Joe before it is born." The wind moved across the sea. The man looked at her hand over his. He remembered River Province, when he had first understood fear. The Abyssal River, when fear became confession. The mountain village, where he had imagined a future near water. None of those memories had spared him suffering, but without them, he would not be alive. Only breathing, only obeying, only empty. His sword lowered. The human doubt, nearly extinguished, pulsed once. Then again, across the mortal world, lanterns rekindled not brightly, not triumphantly, but stubbornly. One by one, grieving people held them closer. They did not stop crying. They did not stop hurting. They simply refused to let pain become the only truth. The man looked at the heavenly sovereign. His eyes were wet. His voice was quiet. "You are right. Emotion creates suffering." The sovereign stilled. "But emptiness does not heal it." He lifted his sword, and the lantern light of countless mortal hearts gathered along the blade. "It only makes sure no one is left to care." The sea roared beneath them. The girl's hand remained in his. Together, silver light and human Tao spread across the wounded sky, carrying not an answer that erased pain, but a promise strong enough to endure it. The man stepped forward. Not as heaven's blade, not as a perfect immortal, but as someone who had chosen the unbearable, beautiful burden of feeling. "Let them grieve," he said. "Let them love. Let them lose. Let them begin again." The sovereign's expression finally cracked. Above them, the last untouched palace of heaven split down the center. And beneath the sea of fallen immortals, the mortal world kept its lanterns burning, not because life was painless, but because even through pain, it was still worth living. Heaven fell without rain. Above the sea of fallen immortals, the last black jade palace split open like a dying moon. Its towers leaned into the wounded sky, divine chains hanging loose from shattered clouds, their golden scripture dimming one character at a time. Beneath it, the mortal world held its lanterns close, as if every small flame were helping push back the dark. The heavenly sovereign stood before the broken throne. For the first time, he looked old. Not weak, not defeated, but ancient in the way of things that had survived too long by refusing to change. "You would give humanity back its suffering," he said. The man stepped across the sea of light, sword lowered at his side. The girl walked beside him, silver chef flowing around her like moonlit tie, the cracked crane charm bright against her wrist. "No," she answered softly. "We are giving them back themselves." The sovereign raised his hand. The entire heavenly system awakened. Across the sky, countless laws ignited, laws that had shaped cultivation for ages, laws that punished attachment, laws that turned grief into corruption and called emptiness enlightenment. Golden chains descended toward the mortal realm, seeking every sect, every village, every trembling heart. The man closed his eyes. He did not sever feeling. He listened to it. Lantern City's wishes rose first. Then forgotten valleys' names. River provinces reign. The mountain villages' quiet dream of peace. The sea of fallen immortals. Every grief, every vow, every love heaven had buried flowed into the human Tao. When he opened his eyes, they held the light of countless lives. He lifted his sword. The girl placed her hand over his. Silver seal and human Tao join, not as weapon and shield, as remembrance and will. Their combined light spread through the sky, touching each descending chain. Wherever it passed, golden law cracked not violently, but like ice melting under spring's sun. Suppressed memories returned to the world. Cultivators gasped as forgotten tears stilled their eyes. Old sect masters remembered children they had abandoned for ascension. Immortals remembered names they had carved out of their souls. The sovereign staggered. "You will drown them. They will learn to swim," the man said. The final chain fell toward the girl's heart, seeking to bind the ancient seal forever. He stepped in front of her. She stepped beside him. Together, they struck. The sky broke open. Not into darkness, into dawn. The heavenly system shattered into millions of silver-gold fragments, falling across the realms like lantern light. The black jade palace collapsed soundlessly into the sea of fallen immortals, and the throne of heaven sank beneath memories it could no longer command. The sovereign watched it disappear. For one breath, his expression softened with something almost like sorrow. Then he too dissolved into light. Far below, every lantern in the mortal world burned brighter. No voice declared victory. No divide bell rang. Only wind moved across the healed sky. The man's sword slipped from his hand. The girl caught him before he fell, just as he had caught her so many times before. Around them, the last remnants of heaven drifted down like harmless snow. He looked at her, exhausted, bleeding, alive. "Is it over?" she whispered. He watched the first true sunrise spread across the freed world. "No," he said quietly, "now they begin." And beneath a sky no longer owned by heaven, humanity felt everything: grief, love, fear, hope, and for the first time, none of it was forbidden. The first spring after heaven's fall was quiet. No divide bells rang above the clouds. No golden decrees appeared on temple walls. The sky remained white and blue, strangely empty where black jade palaces had once cast shadows over the world. For many days, people simply looked upward, waiting for punishment that never came. Then, slowly, they began to rebuild. In Lantern City, paper lanterns returned to the canals, not as offerings to heaven, but as wishes for one another. Children painted them with crooked rabbits, cranes, rivers, and names of those who had not survived the war. When the lanterns rose at night, no one called grief corruption. They let themselves cry opally beneath the moon. In the forgotten valley, new name tablets stood where the mud had once swallowed memory. Sect disciples and mortal villagers knelt side by side, carving names into wood with careful hands. Some wept for strangers. Some apologized to the dead. Above them, pale silver flowers bloomed from soil that had known only ash. River province flowed clean again. Fishermen repaired boats along the banks, while cultivators rebuilt the western bridge stone by stone. On its highest beam, someone tied a faded strip of white cloth in memory of the girl who had once stood there alone against the black wave. She saw it from a distance and said nothing, only touched the cracked crane charm at her wrist. Beside her, he noticed. He always noticed. The world was freer now, but freedom did not make it simple. Some sects collapsed when disciples questioned old doctrines. Some elders could not bear the emotions they had buried for centuries. Hollow spirits still appear in places where grief overflowed, but now people gathered together instead of sealing the wounded away. They sang names. They held hands. They remembered. And often, the darkness passed. The human Tao spread without temples or thrones. A healer strengthened her art by mourning every patient she lost. A sword cultivator discovered his blade became gentler, not weaker, when he fought to protect someone. A child in Lantern City formed her first thread of Che while laughing through tears at her grandfather's funeral. The world had not become painless. It had become honest. One evening, he and the girl stood on a hill above the mountain village where he had refused ascension. Below, smoke rose from rebuilt homes. Rice fields shimmered gold. Children chased a white crane kite across the terraces, its wings uneven but bright against the sunset. "Was this worth it?" she asked softly. He looked at the world they had broken open. There was sorrow everywhere. But there was also soup shared between neighbors, lanterns lit for the lost, lovers walking without shame beneath spring rain, and children growing up under a sky that no longer demanded emptiness. He took her hand. "Yes," he said, The answer was not triumphant. It was peaceful. And beneath the first stars of a world allowed to feel, humanity began again, not perfect, not immortal, but alive. They chose a mountain where the clouds touched the sea. It stood far from sect roads and old battlefields, its slopes covered in pine, wild tea bushes, and small white flowers that opened only after rain. Below, waves moved against dark rocks with the patience of something older than heaven. At sunrise, mist climbed from the water and wrapped the mountain in silver, gentle as the first light after a long war. Their house was small, wooden walls, a tiled roof, a courtyard where herbs dried in woven trays. No throne, no banners, no disciples kneeling at the gate. His sword hung beneath the eaves, untouched for days at a time. At first, he did not know how to live without urgency. He woke before dawn, expecting alarms, wounds, divine pressure, distant cries carried through the human Tao. Instead, he heard only waves, gulls, and the girl humming softly while watering herbs. Tees felt unfamiliar, almost suspicious. She noticed, of course. One morning, she placed a basket of tea leaves in his hands and said, "If you need something to guard these from drying badly." He looked at the basket as if it were a heavenly artifact. Then he did exactly as told. Days became gentle. He learned to mend fences, badly. She laughed when he tried to cook rice and forgot fire did not need sword intent. He walked slower now, not because she complained, but because there was no battlefield waiting ahead. Sometimes travelers climbed the mountain seeking legends. They found a quiet man chopping wood and a woman tending medicine flowers by the sea wind. Most left without recognizing them. A few did, and bowed with tears in their eyes. He always looked uncomfortable. She always smiled and served tea. At dusk, they sat beneath the eaves while rain softened the courtyard. The cracked crane charm still rested around her wrist, repaired with his pale chan worn smooth by time. When thunder rolled far away, his hand found hers without fear. No vows were spoken. They had already chosen each other through war, grief, heaven, and ruin. Now love sounded like water boiling for tea, like her laughter carried through the house, like his quiet footsteps slowing to match hers along the cliff path. One evening, as sunset turned the sea gold, she leaned against his shoulder. "Is this enough?" she asked. He looked at the waves, the herbs, the sword resting unused beneath the eaves, and the hand folded naturally in his. For once, nothing in him begged to become more. "Yes," he said softly. And beside the mountain, beneath a sky no longer owned by heaven, peace finally stayed. Years later, the mountain still greeted the sea every morning. The world had changed. New sects rose and fell. Children born after heaven's collapse grew up hearing stories that sounded impossible. The human Tao had spread across the realms like roots beneath fertile earth. Cultivators still sought strength. Mortals still laughed, grieved, celebrated, and mourned. Life remained imperfect. And because it remained imperfect, it remained beautiful. The man sat alone beneath the old pine tree overlooking the ocean. The tree had grown taller over the years. Its branches stretched above the cliff like protective arms. Beneath it rested a simple wooden table weathered by salt wine and countless cups of tea. His sword leaned nearby, still sharp, still capable of shaking heaven and earth. Yet moss now grew around the stone where it usually rested. The sight would have shocked the cultivation world once. The White Calamity, the destroyer of heaven, the founder of the human Tao, a legend whose name lived in countless histories. And yet most mornings were spent waiting for tea to finish brewing. The waves below rolled against the cliffs in slow rhythms. He listened quietly, not to the world, to life, the cry of seabirds, the wind moving through pine needles, the distant sound of someone humming inside the house. His eyes closed. Memories drifted through him naturally now, not as wounds, not as burdens, as companions. The rain pavilion, the first bandage wrapped around a blooded hand, Lantern City glowing beneath countless lights, the forgotten valley learning to remember, the umbrella painted with fading lotus flowers, River Province burning red beneath the sunset, the abyssal river, the mountain village, the sea of fallen immortals, the day heaven died. An entire lifetime, a lifetime that should never have existed. If he had accepted the heart-severing arc completely, he would have ascended. If he had obeyed heaven, he would have ruled above the clouds. If he had chosen perfection, he would never have suffered. He would never have cried, never feared, never loved. The thought no longer tempted him. The ocean breeze carried familiar footsteps across the courtyard, slow, unhurried, a pace he had learned long ago. The girl, though time had long since made such a title inaccurate, appeared carrying a tray of tea. The same gentle eyes, the same warmth, the same person who had once stood beneath rain and treated heaven's executioner like a human being. She placed the tea down beside him. You disappeared again. I was here. Physically, a faint smile appeared on his face. The smile came easily now. She sat beside him. Their shoulders touched naturally. No dramatic gesture. No grand declaration. Only decades of familiarity, the kind built through surviving the end of the world together, the kind built through ordinary mornings afterward. For a while, they simply watched the sea. Golden sunlight spread across the water. Far below, a white crane glided over the waves. Its silhouette reminded him of an old wooden charm, a cracked charm tied to a sword, a charm that had survived because neither of them had allowed it to fall. The realization arrived quietly. Like most important things, he had gained unimaginable power. He had stood against heaven itself. He had changed the course of history. Yet none of those things felt like his greatest achievement. Not the human Tao, not the war, not the victory. His gaze shifted toward the woman beside him, toward the person who had given a bowl of medicine to a stranger beneath a rain pavilion, toward the person who had taught him that grief was not weakness, that fear was not failure, that being human was not something to overcome, only something to cherish. The ocean shimmered below. His fingers found hers. Even now, after everything, the simple act felt precious. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he finally said, "Do you know something strange?" She looked at him curiously. What? The wind moved softly through the pine branches overhead. The sea breathed below. The world continued turning. And the former executioner of heaven smiled as he looked at the person who had changed his life. I spent so long chasing strength. His voice was quiet, reflective. I thought the greatest fortune in existence was power. His thumb brushed gently across her hand. But I was wrong. Her eyes softened. He looked toward the horizon where sky and sea met beneath endless light, toward a future he had once believed impossible, then back toward her. And for perhaps the first time in his life, his happiness carried no shadow. No matter what I achieved, his voice became almost a whisper. The greatest thing I ever gained was being someone fortunate enough to be loved. The woman beside him laughed softly, tears gathering in the corners of her eyes despite herself. Then she leaned against his shoulder, just as she had countless times before. Above them, the pine branches swayed. Below them, waves kissed the shore. And beneath a sky forever free of heaven's chains, two ordinary people sat together as the afternoon sunlight painted the sea gold. The cultivation world would remember him as the man who changed history. But in the quiet ending of his own story, he preferred a simpler truth. Not the strongest cultivator, not the destroyer of heaven, not the founder of a new Tao, only a man who had once been empty, and who, through love, had become whole.